Right. Good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday, August 30th, 2022. This is a special meeting of the Commissioners of City Rehoboth Beach, live at City Hall, Commissioners Room, second floor. And I'd like to call this meeting to order at 9:02 a.m. With that, we'll start off with roll call. Commissioner Tony Sharp.
Here.
Commissioner Jay Legree.
Here.
Commissioner Ed Chernowski.
Here.
Commissioner Susan Gay.
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Gossett.
Here.
Commissioner Tim Bennett.
Here.
And Mayor Stan Mills. We have a full complement of the mayor commissioners. Therefore, we have a quorum and are formally able to conduct business today. Thank you all for being here. I'd also like to recognize the staff that's here. City Secretary Ann Womack, Interim City Manager Evan Miller, Liz Lingo, City Arborist, City Solicitor Glenn Mandalis, and that's all the staff here. Thank you all for being here. With that, I would like to thank everybody that's in person. Thank you, and also thank everybody that's watching virtually. I wish we could see your faces, but we know you're probably out there. I'd like to remind everybody that documents that support our agenda items when they are ready and available prior to the meeting are embedded into the agenda. Go to the city website. On the center right of the home page is the city portal. Click on that. Look for the date of the meeting and click and play around with that, and you should be able to access the agenda with the support documents embedded. That way you are able to see exactly what we're seeing. With that, I'd like to make just a quick note of change in the agenda sequencing. It's just really that something was misplaced, and that is under A, the Rehoboth, the presentation for new tree ordinance and beyond is actually a part of item C in the business today. So why are we here today? The purpose of this special meeting is to continue updating and reviewing the tree code. And with that, we'll go to item A, which is to discuss and consider best placement in the municipal code for the tree ordinance. Specifically, do we maintain separate chapter 253 trees, or do we incorporate the tree chapter into the zoning code, chapter 270, which would require some additional massaging because of the nature of the where it would go. With that, what I'd like to do, I think, Susan, before I turn it over to you, is I would like for Glenn to just do a very brief summary on how we got to even considering where the tree code should be placed. And then after Glenn just does a brief summary, I want to give you Wallace Montgomery, our city planner's position, and then we'll go back to Glenn, and then we'll open it up for discussion. All right.
Thank you, Mayor. So this agenda item specifically, the way we got there is as we were getting closer to, finalizing some of the articles, Commissioner Gay asked me to start to do a legal review. And as I did that, I started to look at some of the other codes across the country, and there are certainly a mixed batch. Some place the tree regulations within their zoning code. Some, like us, have it in an entirely separate chapter. So I started to question whether zoning regulations were akin, or tree regulations were akin to zoning regulations. As I went through that, it forced me to look at it. We asked Wallace Montgomery to look at it. In my mind, I've become kind of satisfied that because the new proposed tree code kind of treats the regulations with the same rigors that we treat zoning regulations, I become satisfied that it can be in a separate chapter. It's still a discussion for you all to the extent you want to have one, but I become satisfied that it can be in a separate chapter. I think they neatly fit there, and we've done a lot of work to put together this new code. I still have a lingering question about Board of Adjustment appeals versus Parks and Trade Tree Commission appeals, but I think that's such an outside question that it shouldn't bog down this process that's now taken 10 years. So that's kind of where I am with it, Mayor.
All righty. Thank you, Glenn. So that's a brief introduction, very brief introduction. But if you recall, we also asked Wallace Montgomery, our city planner, to render an opinion on this. It is up on the screen there. It's also embedded in the agenda. However, I think it's important enough to this topic that I'd like to read it real quick. Excuse me. This is from Wallace Montgomery, dated August 25th. It's specifically for the presentation at the Board of Commissioners meeting on August 30th, which is today. It is a planning opinion on the tree code with some general comments. Per the request of Mayor Mills, Wallace Montgomery has performed a preliminary high-level review of the following topic. Where should Chapter 253 tree code be located? Within the zoning code or as a standalone chapter? Based on our understanding of the topics raised, our experience and knowledge as professional planners, and having been provided additional context and clarification by Mr. Mandalis, we offer the opinions below for consideration. General comments and impressions. Again, this is on the question of where should Chapter 253 go. On the question of where the tree code should be inserted within the overall city code, my research says Wallace Montgomery has found that municipalities across the nation place these sections in all manner of locations within the code. While there are a good number of cities that place them within their land development sections, we would call that our zoning sections, correct? Others establish these sections outside the development code. I can find no conclusive reason to suggest that the city of Rehoboth needs to place this section in one area versus another. Further, a review of the American Planning Association's website and policy resources do not yield any suggested or recommended locations within a zoning code or municipal code where tree codes should be established. Therefore, it is my opinion that the tree code be placed outside of the zoning code so that the appeals process may continue using the existing processes. And this is signed by Nick Walls. His last sentence that in referencing the appeals process may have come from listening to the commissioners talk at some of the previous meetings, in which case some of us expressed a concern for the appeal process and how it would be handled if it were put into the zoning code, which means it would the appeals would be heard by the Board of Adjustment. So I'd like to, Susan, do you want to reintroduce any portion of this or start the discussion?
Not at all, nope.
Anybody else?
I just need a quick clarification from the city solicitor. Which side did you come out on?
I'm with the planner, fine with leaving it in a separate chapter.
Okay, thank you.
Well, then I'll start off then if nobody else wants to. If you recall at the previous meeting, some of us and I was expressing concern about the appeal process, meaning that if a decision was made by the arborist and even the Planning, Parks and Shade Tree Commission, and it was appealed, the appeal goes to the Board of Commissioners, correct? I don't know, is there a fee with that, Liz, to appeal to the Parks and Shade Tree Commission?
The Parks and Shade Tree appeal fee is $250.
$250. So compare that or contrast that to the Board of Adjustment, which is $1,000. I'm also looking at expediency for our constituency to hear the appeal quicker. I believe it would want to go in front of the Board of Commissioners rather than the Board of Adjustment. I did ask Chair Jerry Capone what he thought about it, just his personal opinion as chair, and he was fine with it. Especially when I indicated that we thought that the new tree code would probably realize fewer appeals process altogether, and that's based on commentary from Susan and Liz. He was fine with it in general, didn't have any problem with it, so that's no worry. But again, for me, I'm looking at the expediency, the price, and I'm leaning toward what is better for our constituency. Anybody else? Therefore, leaving it alone. Anybody else?
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
turn yet?
We'll finish the commissioners first.
Yes. I'm in favor of leaving it alone. I'd like for us to think about changing the name from trees to green infrastructure. It's going to be a significant part of our stormwater management going into future years, a very significant part. And I think we deal with it better in a separate chapter. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Anybody else up here? If not, we'll go to the members of the public. Is there anybody that would like to say anything? Please identify yourself. We need to turn the microphone on first, so pause a second. And you're one that gets up there often enough, we should teach you how to do that, I think, Carolyn. So identify yourself and what your relationship is to the city.
Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident. I had sent in a comment after the last meeting. Trees are so important in the city. I fully support it being a separate chapter also. It highlights it more. It's easier for people to find if it's not buried in the zoning code. So I fully support it being separate. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Anything? Nope, you're good. Susan, thank you. Stephanie, I'm sorry. Anybody else? We have the ability to make a motion and vote on this today. Also, by no action today, we would just continue the course and I would drop pursuit of moving this into the zoning code. So is there a preference to whether we vote on it or?
I don't have a preference, Mayor. It seems to me that nobody's expressed any objection to leaving it in a separate chapter. So if everybody's fine with that by consensus, I think you can just move on.
I just have one quick question before you move to close this out, Mayor. When you say that the Board of Commissioners is more expedient than the Board of Adjustment, did I get that correct?
He said that. He meant the Parks and Shade Tree Commission.
Thank you, because I got a little lost there. Thank you.
Keep me straight, thank you. That's why I'm here. So going once, going twice, going three times, I will say that based on the silence, generally, we will abandon moving this over into the zoning code, which actually, a side result of that is that we get the tree code done sooner than later because it would have required modification. So with that, we draw to a conclusion. Item 4A on the agenda, and we go to items within B. With that, I want to turn it over to Commissioner Susan Gay, who has been leading us very well on this. Would like to remind everybody, especially members of the public, this has been an amazing task, an amazingly challenging task, because it's not simply taking a code and redlining it, making changes, crossing out things. And I just think it's worthwhile mentioning that every other meeting or something. So, but also I want to pat on the back Commissioner Gay. She's been doing a phenomenal job of massaging this, and she's, I know, speak for myself, she's probably the only one that truly knows most about what's in here than I do, that's for sure. A lot of homework to do. Go ahead, Susan.
Well, first of all, I feel like we're getting there, slower than I think all of us wanted, but we are getting there. And in fact, what's on the agenda today in reviewing sections is sort of a finish work, that these were issues that had come up at the last meeting, I think, and I know the mayor's goal is for the next version to be basically a black line version that's clean, that's final, that can go out for, just spend a month out in the public for comment, and then to come back for a public hearing. But there were several elements that I think we reached consensus on at the last meeting that I've put forward just as topics by themselves to resolve once and for all. And then that would move us forward then to actually having a completed document. So the first of those is the minimum tree density. And just as background, the current code is very convoluted in that regard. It has, in the code, it has in meeting density requirements, the following shall apply, and then it's got evergreens and only one small specimen may be counted, no more than a third of the trees may be evergreens. It's got information about line trees, it's got information about existing. It's very complex. And in fact, one of the goals of redoing the code from the get-go was to make it easier to understand and easier to enforce. And so then with the initial revised code, since the minimum density itself hasn't changed, minimum density is still 3 trees, we looked at language that would say the first tree shall be a high canopy native tree, the second tree shall be a native, and the third may be any permitted species from the residential tree list. But Liz even thought, and I think there was discussion at the last meeting, that even that is complex and not necessarily easy for people to follow. And what do we really want anyway? And what we want is for one of the trees to be a native canopy, and also for the trees to be selected from a pretty complete list. I mean, I don't think we're going to be looking at 5 species. We're going to have a pretty complete list, but that list is something that Liz would put together and is outside the code itself. That becomes, a policy thing. So what I've done here in the one document that says 253.22 minimum tree density requirements, I put the entire section here. But there's only a few, what's underlined, starting on line 30, is really the only thing that's new and that we need to resolve today in order to get to a final stage. So now the wording for density requirement would simply read, trees shall be on the City of Rehoboth approved residential tree list, and at least one tree must be a native canopy tree. That's it. No first, second, third, no statements about evergreen versus deciduous, just from the approved list, one of them canopy.
Well, this simplifies it quite a bit from just the last meeting we had,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, because the last still had first, second, third. So this just has from the list, and I know that, I think Liz had told me she's going to put, the list she puts together will have several different components. It'll have a canopy list, and it will have a second list, but it will be clear.
Several places in the codes today, it mentions the City of Rehoboth Beach approved residential tree list. Can you just give us an update on what that means, and do we already have it? Does it need to be updated or modified?
So we have an approved residential tree list that has, I think a couple more than 40 trees on it. So that's what when I started, we didn't really have anything. So I put that together based on the Delaware Forest Service list of recommended trees, and we've been using that ever since.
Very good, thank you.
Question, if I may, on the tree list, will that be incorporated as part of the code, or will that be a standalone appendix, if you will, so it can be easily updated?
I think it was intended to be standalone as it is now.
That's what it is now, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that facilitates easier editing, if you will.
Right.
Okay, very
And I'm
good.
just curious, Liz, when will that be available? Is that,
Well, we just kind of came to this, if everybody's
Right.
in agreement with this, I can work on it. The native canopy, the list A is very easy. The other list might need some work, since we'll be including some non-native species on there.
so we would have that available as we move forward with this, with finalizing this?
Liz, is that something you're in the process of finalizing now?
No, I haven't even really started it, because we just, a couple.
That would really be
Yeah.
a question for Liz, not for me, because I didn't think it was going to be part of the code itself. So,
I think it would help if everybody knew kind of what we were thinking, even
Yeah.
if it's not like a final list, you
That'd
can
be
see
good.
the path we're
the
we're
layout
going.
of it and everything would be great, yeah.
Yeah, I can do that, and we
Yeah,
can edit it from there.
Preview, maybe at our next meeting would be wonderful, and then just maintaining status reports on that into the future, so we know what's going on.
That'd be helpful,
That
thank
would be
you.
great.
I have a question. This may get us into the weeds or the trees, but is there, of that list of 40, is there a thought that there are 5 that are preferred, for instance? In other words, if everyone picks the same tree, I mean, is there some sort of preferred tree that we would recommend? Or is that just getting too far into the...
I try not to recommend trees, but I will, if people ask me the most popular ones, I can say what those are.
Okay.
So the list itself is not prioritized, there's no hierarchy within it.
No, there's
Say we want more pines, or we want more oak, or, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Susan.
Well, I mean, I guess, you want to finish this section before we decide if we're going to vote on it? So is this by consensus that this wording works fine as a final?
Yeah, I think you can get a consensus on all this.
On the whole thing? Okay.
On the whole thing. I mean, I do have a couple questions on some things in between the lines, but,
Okay, well, let me go
let's
to the
finish.
other one that's
I'm
underlined.
not hearing any objections to the edits to 30 and 31. So.
Okay. Then section D on page 2, line 53, where I added at least 1,000 square feet, this is that the requirements would not come into play unless there's a significant renovation, a new build or a significant renovation. The last time we met, we had said land disturbance, and there was a question about, well, what did that mean? How much land disturbance is somebody that's putting a deck on, have to come into compliance? And Liz had suggested using the language that's in our stormwater code for stormwater management, and that's at least 1,000 for putting up the barriers. And that's at least 1,000 square feet. So I've added that same wording in here so that it matches the other part of the code. And then the other cleanup was to say that the approved residential tree list is now the list. I think in the old code, it said something like approved species, and I'm just making it consistent to call it officially the approved residential tree list.
I thought I heard the word canopy list. Was I mistaken?
No, the list as a whole is just the
Tree canopy
residential
list.
tree list. The list as a whole has the trees in it that aren't canopy trees. The list is the complete list of trees.
Yes, I think we're probably going to recommend that we have financial remuneration for people who would agree to plant canopy trees. I don't know we haven't talked about that yet, but it's coming, I think. Other cities do it. Maybe it would be.
I don't know that would go here, though.
No, it'll tell us to take it from the tree canopy list.
Okay.
In other words, you can have credit
Right.
from your stormwater fee
Okay.
by planting trees which are stormwater
Right.
friendly, canopy
great.
trees.
That'd be great.
But we need a good list.
Well,
And it sounds like she has that, or she's doing that.
I mean, I think when we talked about your list being in two parts, the first column would be the canopy ones, right? And then the second column would be everything else?
Yes,
Okay,
that's,
so
or
that-
at least that was the intent or what I
Yeah.
was gonna work on, yeah.
So that's what it'll be.
Great.
My-
This is just in the preliminary stages. We haven't even,
Great.
okay.
I think that's fine. My suggestion would be that we proceed adding as few new items as we can to bring this to conclusion and get it adopted. And then when we get your committee, your task force report, then we start anew with how to implement any new criteria that's coming from the Stormwater Utility Task
In fact,
Force.
I'll be talking about that a little bit later. So you're singing my song there with wanting to give credit for the good trees. So anyway, this is what's been, these were the leftover elements from this section the last time we spoke. So I guess I'm just looking for some direction to move forward on.
I'm not hearing any objections, so I would suggest you just move forward with that.
Okay.
With that, we'll entertain any other comments on it. I would just like to point out that on line 34, it mentions that a line tree shall count in calculating tree density. Just a reminder that I guess that changed since the last one or two meetings because all up until now, it is not counted. So I just wanted to emphasize that. And then lines 22 to 24, I keep reading that and I just keep questioning whether it could be worded more simply or more clear or not, or whether it's just me.
I think that's exactly the same as what's in the code now.
Oh, it
So
is,
if
it
there's a
is.
better
But
way
that
to
doesn't
word it,
mean
great.
that doesn't mean it's clear or
No,
perfect.
I get it, but I'm just saying if there's a better way, sure.
Mayor, it's funny you say that, because when I first started, that was one of the questions I had for Glenn, because I didn't understand it either, so.
Well, good, explain it.
You know, along the same,
I don't want to embarrass you. Can you explain it?
Basically, if you're not a single-family home and you have a dwelling unit, the way the current code is, a dwelling unit, eating, sleeping, and cooking, then you have to have 2 trees per dwelling unit. So like a condo complex of 5 condos would have to have 10 trees.
And it's also applicable within the commercial district, because in the commercial district, it could be a mixed use, so to speak, and have retail on the first floor, residential on the second floor. The residential has residential setbacks and zoning code requirements.
And we've had 3 of those since I've been here with the mixed use.
And I guess that, I also have a question, is the use, because we've experienced this in kind of some other areas of the code, should it be dwelling or dwelling unit? Because if you have, in commercial, if you have dwelling units, and it's commercial, you can build a zero lot line, correct? So where are you gonna,
The commercial part
Correct.
can be, the residential has
and
the
those-
residential setback.
Those 3 cases, they've had fees in lieu, right? Because they couldn't plant the trees,
there's no room?
because there was no room, right?
One of them did not. One of them backed up to residential.
So it had enough room for a tree
Yes,
in
so
that
they
5-foot
planted the
setback?
tree. The other was pre-existing, completely paved, so they did a fee in lieu.
Right,
So
okay.
Patrick, we cut you off, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just, is it term, and I look, I guess, to solicitor for this, and Liz, your input, would this be the opportunity to confirm that's dwelling unit or just dwelling? Because again, if it's a commercial property, unless you back up to a C2 or a residential, it's 0 lot line, correct?
Right.
So where are you gonna plant a tree? You have to go for an appeal to get a permission for that. I'm,
In the new code, though, it would just be a fee, correct? They wouldn't have to go to appeal?
Right.
Right,
Yep.
right.
So for lines 22 to 24, and then Patrick's question, can you put those 2 items on your homework agenda to
Yeah,
talk
sorry, I
with
can't answer it
Liz
right now, but
and
I-
Susan, so that we can just
So you want to try to simplify that, or?
keep moving
well, I
forward?
just,
Whether to say dwelling or dwelling unit?
well, I'm looking to the solicitor, because I know we're also experiencing that question of defining dwelling unit versus dwelling in other applications that we're reviewing currently. So I just don't know if this is the, so to kind of keep it parallel, if it is applicable in both areas of the code. It just, the way I look at it is if you have a dwelling unit, you've got 4 or 5 or 6 in the condo, and it's built in a commercial space, there literally is no room to plant a tree.
Right.
And do we just, then you have to go and pay a fee for that? Is that, if I don't have the space to plant it, then why are you forcing me to do something I can't do, kind of thing, and pay a fee?
Right.
I know we're looking for trees and canopy, but maybe this is an incentive for green roof or solar panels or something of that nature as an incentive, as opposed to, I mean, I don't want to say don't plant a tree, I don't want to get away from that, but if there's no physical room.
Right, and I think when this came up before, one of the things, one of the early meetings that came up, and I think Liz was saying that at least that the people who don't have room for it are at least contributing to trees in the city by having the requirement in there and then being able to opt out of it with a fee in lieu.
Yeah,
That's
a long time ago, we did talk about it in that term.
Yeah.
Like, everybody's kind of doing their part, even if it
Exactly.
can't go right on their lot, it's a street tree in front of the lot, or 2 street
Right.
trees.
Yeah, exactly. But I do like the idea of the incentives.
Well, I'm just,
We've
again,
talked about those before.
trying to question that. So I don't know if, Glenn, if that's something you can, or Liz, if you feel that dwelling unit is appropriate and you haven't experienced a problem with that, or people's frustrations of this, I'm just,
No, we haven't had a lot of problems with that. I mean, like I said, I can think of 3 of those mixed use, and it was just, they kind of took it in stride. I don't think it really phased them, maybe the time frame more than anything, waiting up to 60 days to go to the commission.
yeah,
Which
time
they
is,
would not have to do now.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll take that as a.
All right,
as an
thank
action
you.
item.
And I've got maybe one last question in this section, lines 36 to 38. Again, this is not something that is new. It's something that's existing. And I guess specifically, I'm questioning that at least 1 tree shall be in the front setback area, but not applicable to lots fronting the boardwalk, which I completely understand that. But it's not applicable to any house in the ocean block. Those ocean blocks are pretty long, and there are plenty of trees in the front setback. And I guess I'm wondering the wisdom of continuing with that, and if Liz had any opinion or not.
it's a lot harder to keep them alive when you have more of that coastal exposure. And on top of that, I think this avoids potential conflicts of neighbors regarding views.
So this is specifically to meet density requirements. If they choose to plant a tree in the front yard or a street tree or anything, then there's no objection there, correct?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope, this is just giving them the option. If you have a neighbor that the tree is going to block their view of the ocean, not putting them in that position
Okay.
by the city's requirements at least.
All right. Are there any other, before I go to the members of the public, are there any other comments or questions on minimum tree density requirements?
I do have a question on the lime tree. So how does that count?
I'm glad you asked that.
And then how does that count in terms of replacement?
What was the second question?
How does it count? Like, is it divided by all the properties the tree is on the line of? So if there's one tree on the line between two properties, it counts for half a tree?
That was I'm really glad you asked that, because I think we do need to at least settle that in our minds. In the existing code, as well as in, I guess, the Planning Commission's revision, line trees did not count. It just flat out did not count.
No, no mitigation, no minimum density. They didn't count for, they don't
They
count for
and they
or
didn't count, right,
against.
Yeah, and then in the draft code, in the law oversight version, they counted, and each property owner got a count of half. And then in discussions, we brought it back. I mean, even though historically it had not been counted, I think in discussions here, we decided that they should count, because they tend to be the larger trees, because they're further away from the houses and they're among the most valuable trees. So we put it back in. We didn't really talk about whether it counts one for one. I guess I was under the impression that it would count one for one, that it wouldn't be half, because if it's half, and somebody then ends up with 2.5 trees, how do you replace a half a tree? So and which means they get double counted. That's the downside potentially. They're going to get double counted. But I don't know any other way to do it.
Well, I have a lime tree that I share with the city, and the tree's 100 years old, and the diameter of the canopy is probably puts 60 feet of tree on my property and 60 feet on the city's property. That's a pretty good amount.
But if you were sharing it with a neighbor, then you and the neighbor would each get to count it as one.
And if it's the same tree, 60 feet on my property, 60
Yeah.
feet on there, why wouldn't you say it could count twice? I mean, the 60 and 60 for that type of tree is certainly bigger than, I also have a dogwood that's a lime tree. Well, that canopy total is 20 feet, 10 feet on their side, 10 feet on my side. Now, that's quite a bit of difference.
If that tree had to come down, do you have to pay half?
I'm gonna fight the city on it.
That's a question, though. I mean,
Well, I don't know. It's an interesting scenario, because I've used that as an example before, and I've cited that when that tree was originally planted, it was 100% on my property. And then as it grew, it went across the line. So I don't know, right now it's probably 20% on city property and 80% on mine, but
But I mean, Liz raises a good question. Before, because it didn't count, it also didn't count against. It didn't count for, but it didn't count against. And now, if it's part of tree density,
It does, and that means if you want to take, say, you and your neighbor share a lime tree, and the neighbor's building a new house and wants to take that tree down because it's going to have to be removed because of the driveway. So now you have to plant a tree, and they have to plant a tree.
okay, yeah, that's a good point.
But isn't that supportive, or help me with this, is it supportive of our philosophy now that it is more about quality trees than quantity trees? That a lime tree, as was stated before, is more than likely larger with a bigger spread or canopy. So it seems not only fair that it should count for both, or however many properties are involved, but it supports trying to preserve something like that, because I would ask if it's a driveway, Liz, wouldn't every effort need to be taken to possibly relocate the driveway?
Sure, but
Yeah.
then we put it on the other side and now we're taking out 3 trees. So which one's better?
Well, to me,
It's what we do every day with
Yeah,
these things.
yeah.
We just had a park and shade request for this exact thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not a lime tree, but take out 1 city tree or take out 3 to 5 private property trees.
and I'm sure you have to factor in what kind of trees are
Yeah,
being,
quality.
yeah, quality versus quantity.
So does this factor into it? If you have a line tree and it only counts as half, and you've got 2 full trees on your property, that's 2.5 trees, but you're required to have 3 trees, that really means you're required to have 3.5 trees.
Yeah, but that's why it wasn't gonna be, I mean, we can do the half if that gets around the problem with the neighbor taking one out and then both having to replace. We could do the half, but I think it makes the math, it kind of makes it a little silly, unless you say it's rounded up to the nearest whole number. That's how usually those proportions are done, in which case they would need 4 trees.
I guess I would go with simplicity, that it counts as a full tree, and then later if we find out that there are just a ton of these that we were not aware of, and an alternative comes forward, then we can certainly look at it at that point.
Does this happen a lot?
In new construction, this could potentially be an issue, yes. And I wouldn't necessarily agree that it's always the bigger, better trees. Usually you get a lot of line trees down between the 2 houses,
on the
where it's
sides,
actually
right.
very narrow,
right.
and now they're trimmed on both sides. They have very little canopy. So I don't, there are some nice line trees in the
Yeah,
front
I'm thinking of
yard.
the backs, though,
In
primarily.
the front yard, in the most perfect spot between the 2 properties, where they have 10 feet one way, 10 the other, but.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say that we can't forget that we do have properties that are much larger than 5,000 square feet, that have enormous lime trees.
If you don't mind, we'll pause and go to the members of the public real quick. Carolyn?
Yeah, Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident. As I'm hearing this discussion of lime trees, first, it would seem to me that it's the trunk that has to be on the line, not the canopy, or you'd have virtually every large tree in this city qualifying as a, quote, lime tree because it spans multiple properties. That's one thing. But the other thing is, and I don't know what the right answer is, but to say that if my neighbor has to take down a lime tree to do their construction, and that might force me to plant a tree, then I, as the neighbor, am going to say, you can't do your construction. And I don't know that we want to go there. But to tell a neighbor they have to plant a tree if somebody's taking a tree down, that's bad. We had a lime tree that, okay, it didn't count for anybody. We got permission from our neighbor. So we paid for the full, removal of the tree. This was, and that was the end of the story. So like I said, I don't know what the answer is, but if you're going to tell somebody who happens to be there with a lime tree and the tree has to come down, that and it's being taken down because the one neighbor wants it down, that the other neighbor also has to plant a tree, I think you're opening yourselves up for trouble. That's one thing on this piece. The other thing that I'll just add is your dwelling unit issue is not just mixed use with commercial on the bottom. We have a garage apartment. We have to have 4 trees. This would complicate things, but I truly believe it should be based on what's your lot coverage. When we did our renovation, we had to comply with the 50% lot coverage. So I have no more lot coverage than if I knocked both down and planted one house that was larger, yet I have to have 4 trees instead of 3 trees. So I know that complicates things, but it's, one additional tree probably really isn't that big a deal, but this is more of an issue for not just the commercial with residential above it. It's an issue for anybody that's got a garage apartment. And I also question whether or not it has to have a kitchen or not. I think dwelling doesn't, but maybe dwelling unit does, and that's where you're getting into the definition issue. But but I think it should be looked at as how much of your lot do you have covered?
Thank you, Carolyn. Let's address the line tree issue as far as when is it counted, how is it counted? Glenn, you look up definition of a line tree?
Pretty simple, any tree located on a property line.
Yeah.
Any tree.
Thanks, Glenn.
So so it is the trunk.
Well,
Yes,
Yeah,
and,
it's the trunk.
yes.
and so Stan, does yours share part of a trunk with the city property, or you're saying only the canopy in yours? You gave that example.
No, the trunk.
The trunk does too. Because I think one of the things we talked about, I have a little note from the last meeting, was that it was any portion of DBH that's on the line. In other words, so it doesn't have to be straight down the half. It could be 20% on one and 80% on the other, but if any portion of the DBH, I guess, of the trunk. So do we need to clarify that, I guess?
That's the traditional ruling in court, but they have gone back and forth a few times regarding like who planted it and the percentage of trunk. So say you have a 50-inch tree, like the mayor does, and say he planted it, or his grandparents planted it 100 years ago on their property, and as it's grown now, out of 50 inches, 2 inches is on city property. Does the city really? So that's why the courts have gone back and forth, but traditionally, it's any percentage of the trunk at DBH.
So then I guess the question becomes, do we need to, we could change the definition rather than putting a clarification here.
Expanding the definition.
Expand the definition, yeah.
So currently, they don't count,
Currently, they
right?
do not count.
So, and the reasoning we're now counting them is because,
There are a lot of them.
People wanted them to. That was feedback. Well, if we have this tree here, it should count for something. But now when you see the flip side, I think
There is a flip
That's
side.
what
There's a flip
complicates
side to
it.
everything, right?
Yeah.
I think I'd like to see see it cleared up and even have the word trunk in there possibly. I don't know, but the scenario that you presented before that, somebody questioned, could it be just part of the canopy that's over the line? Well, again, that same 100-year-old tree, based on that philosophy, could be 50 feet from the one property line. Could be smack dab in the middle of my property, and yet the canopy goes over the property line on both sides. So it's not a line tree, it's that the trunk, part of the trunk.
I do agree with Ms. Stiefendorfer that if somebody's putting a driveway in next to me, I don't feel I should be obligated to put a tree in. I do agree with that.
How do you get around that?
It doesn't seem that the person who needs to take the tree down should be the person who's mitigating, right? I mean, don't hold your neighbor accountable for the tree that you're required to take down. Shouldn't they mitigate, if there's something needs to be done on the neighbor's lot, they should
They
bear
put
the
up 2
expense
trees.
of that?
They'd be losing their, they might lose their density, you're saying.
Yeah,
Right,
then
so if
they
they-
would be, then they wouldn't be compliant. So say they built a new house a few years ago and had that counted, we're in the future now, that counted as their front yard tree. So they have a new home, and now next door they're building a new home and it counts as their front yard tree, but they want to take it out for the driveway. So,
If I'm the neighbor who's taking down the tree and affecting the neighbor who is totally compliant, I feel as though I should be the person who's making them whole.
well, so now we go fast forward and I go out for their 1-2 year inspection for the existing house that now has no front yard tree. What do I do? They're not in
No,
compliance.
what I'm saying is the person who takes the new person who's taking the tree down needs to mitigate on their neighbor's
Oh,
property.
pay, so then we're getting
for
into
both properties.
mediating.
Pay for
That's
2.
tricky, I think. We get into mediating neighbors.
Well, I get into litigation, and I know that if this guy over here is just required to plant a tree because this guy took down the tree, that person's not gonna be happy. So,
In that scenario, the line tree, can the neighbor doing construction take it down without permission of the other neighbor?
No.
So maybe it puts that in their ballpark to come to agreement on who pays for it.
that's true.
But that I would think would be a civil thing, not something that we need to.
Well, then the city gets into it because, well, you gave me a building
No.
permit and da.
Liz, do
No, we don't want the city in it.
Right.
you have issues with this?
With,
With just say there's a dead line tree and neighbors are fighting who's paying to take it down? Or,
I usually tell them they have to work that out on their own, and
And they do?
I think they, as
'Cause
far as
I
I
mean,
know, they do.
I had one dead lime tree, and I mean, it just, we were like, oh, we're split the cost, and we put in a hedge, you know, to replace it after, and it was, I don't know, it was just automatic, like, oh, we're gonna split it.
That's normal, that's what you would hope for. I'm sure that's not every single case.
I would suggest to simplify this, we just say a line tree counts as one for each of the property owners. And that, just off the record, that if that scenario happens, that the two owners have to work it out on who pays for it. Because the city doesn't want to get into that civil.
That's true.
Liz, would there be any advantage or disadvantage to expand the line tree definition to list a minimum DBH, or so that we're looking at mature trees and trying to maintain mature trees? So if you've got like a little sapling or something of that nature on the line, trying to, again, create an incentive to maintain the canopy of the city, that, I don't know if that gets too complicated, or that would try to, you know, enhance or maintain the canopy.
I mean, I don't understand the difference. I mean, if it either counts for a half, it counts for one, or it doesn't count. It's easiest not to count it.
Right.
I think we've shown that.
Right, yeah.
But I
you're
think it
saying
needs to be
count it
one,
only
it
if
needs
it's
to be one of those three options, not it counts if it's a 30-inch oak or large, like that does get very complicated.
Okay.
So, Mayor, just to be clear, what you're suggesting is the line tree counts as one for each property owner, so that if there is construction and that line tree comes down for construction, 2 trees would need to be, it would take 2 trees to replace.
Well, one property would have to come into compliance with having a minimum of 3 trees, and the other property owner would have to come in compliance with 3 trees. So yes, the answer is 2 trees would have to be planted.
So just to help me with Edward's example, if you already had enough on your property, then you would plant 0 trees?
I can't remember what the mitigation stuff was, but I guess possibly, yeah.
The mitigation
Or
was 1 for 1.
We have the
right?
flip side, say, one of the neighbors has 0 trees, just this line tree. Now they're planting 3.
Well, but, so is it superseded by if you take down one, you put in one?
I think the minimum density and the tree for tree mitigation are still separate things, right?
Yeah, it's 1 for 1, but if you have 90 inches, we're gonna get to that one next. Liz has suggested 90 inches of DBH or more, then you don't have to mitigate.
Okay.
But it's the same for the minimum density, it's the same as now, as if you have 1 tree and you take out that 1 tree, you have to put 3 back to meet the minimum density, right?
You mean if you were grandfathered by you didn't meet code before, you're saying that now that you have
Yeah.
to meet, you have to bring it up to code? Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
We pause and go to the members of the public. Stephanie, would you like to say something? Give us your name and identify your relationship to the city.
Stephanie Smith. I live in South Rehoboth on Norfolk Street. Stephanie Smith. I live at 216 Norfolk Street. You know, I know we're all talking about this kind of, you know, in the moment, and none of us have time to go home and write, you know, what it might sound like. But as a homeowner, I am a line tree girl, but, you know, if I'm getting credit for that tree as 1, and it ends up having to come out, then I wouldn't be upset if I had to plant a tree. I know my minimum is 3, actually mine is 5, but if I got to count it on the front end as counting for that number, then I don't see why anybody would think it was unfair. If the tree has to come out, then I've got to go plant a tree. I think you've eliminated a lot of the hostility that homeowners feel about these tree regulations by just saying, if a tree comes out, then you have to plant another one. It's 1 for 1. It's not 3 for 1 or 10 for 1 and fees on top of it and all that stuff. Just my thought.
Thank you, Stephanie. And that's already said in the code, so that's already established. So again, I think what the question is, how do we count the line tree? And I'm satisfied with it counting as one
And then
for each property owner.
expand the definition to make it clear that it's the trunk that sits on the line.
There's nothing saying that you couldn't replant a lime tree, right?
Yeah, I guess that would be the easiest option.
Yeah, well, that's true, yeah. Yeah,
One for one in the same place kind of thing, you know?
yeah, make everybody whole.
Skirting the issues. Found a loophole.
Liz, from a procedure standpoint, let's just say a tree, someone gets a building permit and a tree permit to remove that line tree for new construction. What would you require from the neighboring property that, I guess my fear is that someone that is not paying attention to the tree code, has no idea, they've got trees on their property, whatever the case may be, it may be enough or not enough, but they're not paying attention. But someone is building a new house next to them, and they want that tree to come down, and then all of a sudden, wait, you're taking the only line, that line tree is the only tree I have. Now you're telling me I have to plant 3 trees?
Yep, that could happen.
So what would you require from that neighboring property in this process?
Well, we would require the notarized letter for permission to remove it. And then we would require a planting plan with a signed agreement with whoever was doing the planting, the nursery or a landscaper. So I guess we'd be doing double the work because I'd have a planting plan from both properties.
And let's just say what opportunity does that neighboring property have to say, no, you're not taking the line tree down?
If the person wanting to remove it can't provide a notarized letter that they are okay removing it, then we can't issue the permit.
But again, that's between the property
Yeah, yeah,
owners. We don't step into that.
Yeah, I just want to understand the process and where the opportunity is for consent. Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm not hearing any counters or objections to counting it as one tree.
You
For
can
each
take my
property
objection.
owner.
I think it's way too convoluted and we could be creating a lot of issues.
For counting it as one.
Yeah,
Tree
I think it's better as it is now because like Commissioner was just saying, so then I have this notarized letter saying they can remove it. Well, I don't have anybody's contact information. Now we're doing twice the inspections, twice the review. What if they don't agree? There's a lot of issues there that need to be worked out that I don't think we've thought through. The intent is good.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
I think the execution is a problem.
I agree. I don't think we can force the other homeowner to have to come up with a plan and then plant 3 trees. I think that as much as you don't want the city to be involved in litigation there, I think that opens us up to it.
So do we go back and?
So we're slowly coming back around.
Maybe this is why it was always like that.
Unless that property owner says, could they plant 6 or do they pay for the neighbor's 3 trees? But then that, right? I mean, that's.
Well, I can see both sides of it, Tim. I've always had a problem, though, with trees bigger than this being a line tree and not counting. And again, I go back to my example. My tree is about like this diameter. 3 people can't hug it. And yet that doesn't count as a line tree.
But I thought the whole goal of this getting as far as it has was, Mayor, as you just said, to give people credit for trees on the line as opposed to giving them absolutely nothing. I thought that was the nugget, that it annoyed homeowners that they were not given credit for that. Am I wrong that that's where this stemmed from in the first place? Hello, anybody here but
I
me?
don't have many complaints about it to my face. I guess maybe I should preface with that.
So Susan, as this bubbled up, what was the nugget that,
Well, my recollection is, because again, on the draft that I first presented, sorry, on the draft that I first presented, it wasn't counted. And the reason it wasn't counted is because more revisions of the current code and one of the revisions had it still not counting. Only one revision, the LOC, had it counted with this funny little formula about half. And so, you know, it's just like, okay, there were more people that thought it shouldn't count. Then in discussions here, it got to the value of those, because, you know, looking at quality over quantity, it got to the value of those large line trees. That's how it changed.
right,
I think, that's my recollection of how it changed.
Well, I would like to bring this to a conclusion.
Yeah.
We don't, what we decide today only means that's what will be in the code proposal.
yeah,
It doesn't mean that that is what's going to be adopted, because remember, we're going to go to a public hearing. Not that we need a public hearing. The whole purpose of public hearing is just to elevate the meeting for members of our constituency. And then maybe at that point, we let them voice their opinions on it so that we can make our decisions on which way to go. So we need to decide, are we going to have it count? Are we going to 1 and 1, or to put in there for the proposal, or do we want to, the alternative is that we take that out, line trees shall not count,
right.
right?
Revert to the current wording.
So I'm only hearing,
I support that it counts
Yeah, I do too.
without regurgitating everything we've already discussed.
I agree. We had to think of the canopy and preserving it.
well, then with my opinion, I'm gonna direct Susan to put it in that it counts as one tree for the purposes of going forward.
So, again, I would support it counting, but again, I would look to being a minimum of DBH, I guess, in that some regard, in that thing. But if it sounds like a silly question maybe, but if the tree doesn't count, then if I want to take it down, I still have to go through the process of getting a tree permit, a tree removal permit, and redoing. So if it doesn't count, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but if it doesn't count, why do I have to go through a permitting process if it's not part of the tree canopy, if you will?
So if you don't have to get a permit unless it's over 8 inches. Right?
It's over 8 inches, so maybe that's the starting point.
That's
So
true of
you
any
have
of
to
them.
get a removal permit, but you
Right.
don't have to replace it. Correct, Liz?
Currently, yes. I think maybe one way to help would, and we don't do this now, but maybe we should, is require 2 permits. So 35 Lake and 37 Lake, if they have a line tree, they would each have to submit a permit. Then we get away from the notarized letter and the separate planting, like, we're treating it like 2 separate trees and 2 separate permits. I think that'll help if
That's
you want to count it.
obligating the homeowner who's not, multiple fees.
Yep,
right.
but it is twice the work. So,
Well, through no fault of one of the homeowners, so that, you know, it's interesting, is philosophically, I like this, but logistically, it does present some real issues.
yeah, I'm not in disagreement that a line tree matters and that the canopy is important,
Right.
but I just see it being a challenge.
Well, you know, I hadn't thought of this till just now, but I guess I do wonder, since there's no mitigation required if there's 90 inches of DBH or more, is that how it would count, it could count? In other words, it wouldn't count just as a one-for-one tree, but it would count toward the overall DBH? Is that a way around it?
I don't understand.
Well, it probably wouldn't work, because it's probably 2 different things.
Well, can we do this? We'll go ahead with the plan I articulated, and that gives us all more time
okay.
to contemplate, as well as members of the public to contemplate it and present more questions or their opinions at the public hearing.
Good.
With that,
I have one other question, I'm sorry, just jumping to line 38, this is again solicitor question. The word fronting the boardwalk, looking around, I don't see that we use the term fronting a lot, we use the term abutting. For consistency, does that make a difference? Or, I mean, abutting to me is adjoining or bordering. Fronting, does it make a difference or not? We don't use it elsewhere.
you know, to me, abutting it can be sideways, it can be perpendicular, parallel, whatever, whereas I assume the word fronting means having a frontage on the boardwalk, because do we have any that are sideways on the boardwalk?
I don't know.
Fronting also refers to a front door, the address. So if a house has an address of, Newcastle or Laurel or something of that nature, and it's the house at the very end of the block, theoretically, it's not fronting the boardwalk, but it is abutting the boardwalk.
Glenn, would you just go ahead and add that to your homework, come up with a response for that?
I know it's
Say
picky.
fronting or abutting. Just that or abutting, right?
Fronting or abutting, belts and suspenders.
All righty, with that, we'll close out this topic on minimum tree density. Thank you very much, and we will go to the next item on the agenda is mitigation, confirmed tree for tree. Susan?
Let's hope this one will be easy. Of course, the current formula is very complex. That's why there were a lot of cases before Parks and Shade Tree. And we looked at doing a formula that would still take into account the size of trees being replaced. And we had come up with one that had, depending on the size of the trees removed, you would either have to plant, 1, 2, 3, or 4, but you'd never go above 4. That would be the maximum. And even that ended up being a little complex. And so at the last meeting, I had a chart that compared all three, including tree for tree, and I think the consensus was that was the way to go. And in fact, in talking with Stephanie before the meeting, I realized I probably do want to change one word on line 18. So I have the new wording is each protected tree shall be replaced with probably should use the word one there.
A what?
With one tree instead of a tree. Each protected tree removed shall be replaced with one tree of the same species as the tree removed, or with one tree selected from the City of Rehoboth approved list. Instead of the word a, because a is maybe not as precise. That it's 1 for 1. And then the other addition, and it was a number that Liz had come up with to allow for credit, because in our current system, this is one of those things that we're trying to clean it up, but the unintended consequence is that if somebody had a heavily treed lot, they'd still have to plant, given 1 for 1. Whereas right now, with the mitigation, it's if you have a heavily treed lot, you don't have to plant. So she added that if there are 90 inches of DBH or more of trees remaining on the lot, then you do not have to replant. And the only other change here, and this may be the part that we didn't completely finalize discussion on, but down on line 31, the whole issue of on-site inspections, whether they were 6 months, whether they were 12 months, the whole enforcement of these plantings. And I think Liz had said that as much as a third of them don't ever get planted. They just don't get planted. And it's hard to keep up with that, and it's hard to enforce that. So then we talked about adding that the property owner must provide a signed proposal for planting or receipt of purchase for any replacement tree. That way, at least it's known up front that they intend to comply. There's still an inspection process, but even if it doesn't happen, they're more likely to comply if they've had to prove up front that they purchased it or have a contract to plant the tree.
Does a signed proposal mean that that's binding? Or could a signed proposal be presented to the city and then canceled?
It could be presented and canceled
Okay,
for most places.
just curious.
Yeah, I mean, so when I first started, we did not require actual planting plans. So we just put it in the permit, must plant one tree. And we had, when I went back and followed through on those inspections, maybe about a third compliance. So I started requiring, which the code says we should, requiring the actual planting plan, what tree, where, and what size. And we upped that to about 2/3 compliance. So even something that simple really did, coupled with doing the inspections, did help. So it'll be something, it'll always be a problem, but I think this could help.
But the intent is good, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and we're also putting a little responsibility on the contractor in that case too.
Yes.
Like, hey, you signed this, you have this agreement, what happened? I wouldn't be surprised if contractors didn't let me know that people pulled out of contracts if this happens, so.
I have a comment on something, but is there any further discussion on the underlined areas, which is the new additions, right?
Yeah, it's the clarification, it's what we talked about at the last meeting, but it's just the wording, the final wording proposed.
Well, let me bring up my question. On lines 13, 14, mitigation shall be required for the loss of any protected tree. Mitigation shall include the following. Number one, replacement trees, either preserved, relocated, or newly planted, shall be of a species permitted by 253-21.
Okay, that's a good catch. What that should say is, because we're consistent, making all the wording consistent, shall be on the City of Rehoboth Beach approved residential tree list.
Okay, you just resolved it. Because there's no list in 253-21.
Okay.
The old list was 253-7, species to be planted. But again, you just clarified that, so that's a section of the code, Susan, that somewhere in all your direction, you've removed 253-7 from the code?
Remember, it's been divided into different articles.
Okay. Because I don't want 253-7 to remain anywhere in there with lists of species to be planted if it's to be supplanted by the residential list that we talked about earlier.
Everywhere where it says species permitted, we should change it to be we should change it to be the City of Rehoboth Beach residential tree list as an official designation, I think.
So line 18 could be simplified as well, correct? We could just say each protected tree removed shall be selected from the City of Rehoboth Beach approved residential tree list, rather than saying same species or.
Well, no, but what we talked about at the last meeting was that it was desirable that it would be the same species.
Right, but as I read this, I could plant whatever I want.
No, so like if you take out a Japanese maple, that likely will not be on the approved tree list. You can either put back in a Japanese maple, or you can put something from the tree list in. That was the intent, right?
I think so, yes.
Do we want that to happen?
Well, that kind of ties into what I was going to ask. I mentioned earlier, if this mitigation is separate from the minimum density requirements, because currently they're not. Like, you can have trees count for mitigation and for your minimum density trees.
Right.
Does that make sense? Does everybody understand what I say when I mean that? What I mean when I say that?
No.
Okay. So say you have a 30-inch tree to be removed. So you would have 30 inches of mitigation. Say you have 3 trees on your property that meet minimum density. You don't have to plant 30 more inches. Those 30 inches are already met by the 3 existing, so they count both as your 3 for minimum density and your 30 inches for mitigation. And I don't know, we've made a reference in this code if they're together, separate, or what.
And I don't know right offhand either.
Or if it does, I can't find it in the draft. Glenn, do you know what line of code I'm talking about in the existing where it says mitigation credit, trees preserved, or something on site?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's in the, go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's why, I thought that's why we added the 90 inches, but then anything less than that was going to have to be replaced. I thought
Okay,
that
so
was the
they're
whole
separ-
idea of the
they're
1-for-1.
separate.
Yeah.
Okay. I do think we
I
need
thought so, yeah.
somehow, I think that's what you've told me before, but I do think we need to make that clear somehow.
Okay, but I don't know how you, I have to say, I go back to the question, I'm wondering now if we should have the same species on here removed, or just, as Tim says, have one tree selected from the list, because what if it's the same species of one that's not on the list, or is, not necessarily desirable, like they could put a better one? I mean, should,
If they have a ginkgo.
Just pick one off the list.
right, so should it just be, I think the idea behind that, when that came up at the last meeting, was that we wanted people to replace an oak with an oak if they could, or a maple with a maple if they could, but they don't have to.
Well, put it
That's
in the
how it
eye of, say, a property owner that 8 years ago was allowed to put in a crepe myrtle, or the city signed off on them putting in a crepe myrtle, let's put it that way. Now that crepe myrtle has grown and it's 20 feet tall and they haven't ornamentally trimmed it and it looks like a nice tree in the front yard. Then say it starts to decline and they have to take it out, or it gets a bad case of aphids.
Yeah.
So we're gonna tell them what you did 8 years ago was fine, the city signed off on it, but now you've gotta put a different tree back. So if we're okay with that, then we can remove that, because that would be a very easy example that I'll come across.
But isn't the exception to that, I'm just trying to get this straight in my head, is if I was deeply in love with that crepe myrtle and I wanted to replace my crepe myrtle with another crepe myrtle, possibly a different color.
Yeah.
So under this scenario, I would not be able to do so.
Well, under this, the way 3 is written,
Good
yes.
now.
If we remove the beginning, then no.
Right,
And I don't have a.
right. Because I think Commissioner
feeling one
Bennett
way or
was
another.
saying, take out that part about the same species.
Right, because if there was a species that does not adhere to where we currently are, that would be the issue. So we don't want somebody planting something that might have been okay 10 years ago.
But
Those pear trees were an example, right, I think?
Yes.
isn't that already included somewhere, the specific trees that are prohibited?
Well, but as I read this, I could
There are a
either plant
few-
the
there are a
same
few of those.
species, or I could just pick something off the list. This is an either-or.
Yeah, but if elsewhere in the code it prohibits certain trees,
There's only like 4 of
then
them.
that's what rules over this. Name a tree that may not be allowed.
Japanese maple, crepe
Japanese,
myrtle.
Japanese maple, okay, so you have a Japanese maple. This says you can replace it with a tree of the same species.
that's Right.
However, you go to the other section of the code that prohibits using a Japanese
No,
maple.
I don't think the Japanese maples are on there as a prohibited invasive. No, there's only like 4 species that are on there as prohibited invasives.
Yeah, Leland, but I don't think we even prohibited them from being planted on private property. I think we just excluded them from replacement in the permit
Yeah, okay,
process.
Yeah, okay.
It's just not clear to me. It allows me to either say I can plant what was there, which we might not agree with, and/or pick something off the list. It doesn't say replace it with what you took out, period.
Well, I mean, do we want to just say it shall be replaced with a tree selected
With our
from the
approved tree list.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
I think it should stay the way it's written, because you don't want to get into the habit of discouraging people from planting trees, whether it's a crepe myrtle or a Japanese maple, and feeling like, oh, well, I can't plant this because if I have to remove it, then I'm gonna have to put in an oak.
But Liz, this is aside from the minimum tree requirements, correct?
That's kind of the question I asked, which I think the answer was yes.
So they will already have a canopy tree, they will already have a,
They may not. They could have they could have one Japanese maple on the lot.
And you, as the arborist, would prefer they not put another Japanese maple in, correct?
I don't have a preference either way. I think Japanese maples are beautiful and they certainly have a spot.
And the reason they're not on the approved list is,
We don't have an official one for the draft, but I think the idea was to expand the species list some, but to leave the native canopy in column A, and then column B would be medium to large non-natives and small natives, and not encourage the planting of the ornamental non-natives. Because they won't have the canopy to have that benefit, right? And then they won't have the native status to have the habitat wildlife benefit.
I think I'm inclined to leave lines 18, 20 alone, to give constituents a variety of choices, as long as we have maintain a list of prohibited trees.
Yeah, we do have that.
I think I was under the impression that this only counted after the minimum requirement was in place. So that they already have a canopy tree, they already have a native tree, whatever the three requirements are. Anything in addition to that then could be replaced one for one. But if someone only has a Japanese maple on their property and we're saying they can replace that with another one, I don't think that's right. That gets away from the whole purpose of this ordinance, which was supposed to be quality over quantity.
Yeah, they
Okay,
do.
but that's how I'm taking this, and what we've just said is if you have one tree, a Japanese maple, that has to come out and it's, say, 10 inches, you have to meet the minimum density
Yeah.
of 3 trees.
Right.
And then a 4th tree, either a Japanese maple or another tree on the list, would have to be planted to satisfy number 3 here,
Well, that's fine then.
Right.
But
okay?
I don't think that's clear enough.
That was kind of what I was saying. Because in a few minutes ago, in the current code, we have the mitigation credit, which makes it so that they count for both, and that's why I asked if these were separate. So we do need something to state that this is above and beyond minimum density.
That'll help me work on that one. Okay.
On line 29, 28, 29, the property owner shall be responsible for maintenance of mitigation trees. Such responsibility include replacement of unhealthy and dead trees. Should there be a timeline? Do they have to maintain these forever?
What do you mean?
Well, it says they have the responsibility to include replacement of a dead tree. Well, if it dies in 15 years after planted, are they still responsible for it? Or at some point it revert to maintenance by the city?
The city.
The city.
I guess I'm thinking, maybe I'm
I don't know, you're thinking.
thinking of street
You're
trees,
thinking of street trees.
right? Mitigation on the street tree. So Susan, review what the changes have been articulated here, starting with, of course, lines 13, 14.
Right. Well, for 13, 14, we were going to say, we were just going to clean that up to say the city of Rehoboth Beach residential tree list instead of species permitted in 253.21. Then for line 18 and 19, replace the word "a" with the word "one" and also with the number 1. So it's clear it's 1 for 1. And the others are as stated here, but we're going to work on clarifying that this is over and above minimum density, that it's separate requirement from the minimum density requirement.
Anybody else up here? We'll go that path. Any members of the public want to? Carolyn, Stephanie?
Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident. If I was trying to look for it quickly, but the definition of protected tree would be that not only is it large, but it's meeting your minimum density, right?
That is one of the
So,
8 inches or more.
well, but if you're only planting a 2-inch tree, right? In the new proposed, you'd be doing a 2-inch tree, but if that dies and you have to take it down, it's still protected if it was part of your minimum, I think.
guess.
Yeah, yes.
So the piece about the protected tree, 8 inches or more of DBH, I think if it's protected and it's less than 8 inches, you still have to replace it. So that's where I think there may be some confusion. I mean, I think it'll, hopefully, when the whole shooting match is available for review, it'll become obvious, but if you have a protected tree that is less than 8 inches and it's protected because it meets your minimum,
Yeah.
it still has to be replaced. So I'm not sure if that 8 inches or more of DBH should be in there as a parenthetical item. Because if you're removing a protected tree, whatever made it protected, whether it's because it's large or it meets the minimum, we got to replace it 1 for 1 unless we have more than the 90 inches.
Well, let's pause a minute. Let me read the definition of protected tree. Any tree meeting one or more of the following descriptions. Number 1, specimen tree, tree stand, or historic tree as defined in 253.28 of this article. Number 2, protected tree definition again. An existing tree of 3 inches caliper or more, which is necessary to meet the density requirements. Number 3, definition of protected tree, an existing tree of 6 inches caliper or more. And number 4, an existing tree of 3-inch caliper or more that is in the area between the front lot line and the front of an existing residential structure.
But that's not.
And that 3 inches,
Yeah.
it's not 3 inches anymore, I think it's 2, right? Because we're saying we
This
can
is,
get it.
this is the original.
The
definition.
original. I think
Right.
it's because it's going from 3 inches and 12 feet to 8 inches and 2,
Right.
or 2 inches and 8 feet.
The new definition just has a tree that is necessary and counted to meet density requirements, or an existing tree of 8 inches DBH.
Right, so
Which is
if
why
you're
that's
8
been
inches,
repeated
you're
here.
automatically protected. But
Right.
if you're under 8 and it's part of your minimum,
You're
that's
still
still protected.
protected.
So that 8 inches might need to be pulled out of there.
Right.
No, because these are separate. This is mitigation.
Right.
What she's talking about, the 2-inch tree is minimum density. So they're just in separate sections of the code.
So a
If I
protected,
take out a tree that's protected because it's part of my minimum, but let's say it's only 6 inches,
Then you have to
I
replace
still have
it.
to replace it.
Yes, under the minimum density section of the
Right,
code.
yeah, okay.
Right.
So, okay.
No,
But if
this
you're-
is
but
right.
Are you saying if I
Right, it is.
I
have,
see what you're saying.
are you saying though under this, if I have 5 trees, I need to take out a 4-inch tree, I don't have 90, are you saying we don't have to replace it, or we do because it's a 1 for 1?
It's a 1 for 1.
Right.
If you don't have 90.
So that 8 inches there, I don't know if it really I don't know that it adds value, and I think it might cause confusion.
So you're just saying protected tree, period.
Period.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
don't qualify it with the 8 inches.
Well, that's what I think, but I don't know if that makes sense. And maybe, like I said, when the whole thing's available for review, it might become
I take your
obvious.
point. I mean, Liz is saying they're separate, but I take your point that it may not need to be stated that.
Right.
or you state both things, which could be a protected tree, the minimum density or the 8-inch.
Right.
Well, that's how it's
Right.
defined.
And that is in the definition.
Yeah, that's how it's
but
defined. So
But here,
You
where,
seem to be pulling out only a
Right, yeah, I
type
get
of
it.
protected
yeah.
tree by
Yeah.
putting that, I
so
think.
either put both of the protected trees in parentheses or take
Get rid
the
of
8-inch
get rid of
out.
that
Or just-
parenthetical
yeah,
item
go by the
altogether.
definition.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So if it's
Protected tree
defined, then
as
we don't.
defined by or whatever.
Right, yeah, I mean, each protected tree. I mean, in fact, we may want to capitalize the P and the T, right? For protected tree, if we're going by something that's defined, a defined term.
Susan, you have enough direction then
Oh,
to
I guess so. More-
revise as well as,
Just kind of pick at the scab here a little
Okay.
bit, but number 4 there, no mitigation required for 90-inch DBH. Did we decide that if we're going to count a line tree, that the whole DBH of the line tree counts towards that?
I guess so.
Yeah, it was 1 for,
yeah,
counted both properties,
Just want to
right?
clarify.
Yeah,
Got it. Okay.
That's-
If we count.
If we end up counting,
Right.
which we may not. Okay, can we move on to the third one?
Number 3, which is review, update all fees in the tree ordinance.
Okay, now the reason this is here, and the reason it's sort of separated out and is not, all of the language that each part of the code that has a fee is included, is because, Mayor, this is what you asked for this. You asked for a review of fees, and specifically on, how it measured up with the actual cost that the city incurs. And so Liz has provided some very good actual costs on the second page, but before we get to that, let me just say, so what I did was I pulled out of the code, because this is a good way to basically see what the total fee impact on people is, because we may want to change that. And right now, there are, for basic tree plans and permits and all that, there's 3 fees. There's the review fee, tree plan review fee. There's a removal permit fee. There's a fee in lieu of mitigation, if it comes to that. But also, there is and I didn't realize this till Liz reminded me, there's a general fee of, I don't even have it in front of me, 25?
20.
20, for anything that comes to building and licensing, but since this comes to building and licensing, that general fee would apply too. In other words, it's not in the tree code, but it would apply to any project. So, and I think that when the current code has a tree plan review fee of 50 and a removal permit fee, administrative fee of 50. And we changed in the draft, we changed the proposed tree plan review fee to 100, just, I think, because of the passage of time, whatever, that 50 seemed like not enough to cover the actual cost, though I don't know what the actual costs are in that sense. But for the removal permit, we actually left the fee the same, administrative fee, but we lowered the administrative fee from 50 to 25, and instead included a fee that was taking into account the size of the tree coming out. There was more of a proportionality there between the fee and the size of the tree coming out, and the fact that the fee is waived for dead trees. The fee in lieu of mitigation has been set for a while, I think, at $1,200, because that covers the cost of buying, planting, and maintaining for 2 years a tree on city property that has been mitigated per the fee. So that was, and even though I guess Parks and Shade Tree has the authority to change that right now they set it, and they set it at various amounts. So by having a flat amount in the code, that we would maybe get around some of those discrepancies. But the real issue comes in with the appeal to Parks and Shade Tree. And of course, we're expecting that there may be a lot fewer of those, but nevertheless, it allows for an appeal. And the current is $250 and the proposed is $250, but this is where Liz got some actual costs, and it turns out it's costing the city for each one of those appeals on the order of $620. So the question is, do we want to change that?
Well, let's talk just a minute, our general city philosophy on applicants paying for services. I think that's what we've done with the Board of Adjustment. We're trying to get them to pay for services. They pay $1,000 as an applicant. Parks and Shade Tree Commission, of course, we've talked about that here. Planning Commission pays for what? Partition? Do they pay for partitionings and subdivisions and all that stuff? So I would hope and think it's appropriate for this upcoming budget that we review all the fees and business license, everything, to make sure we adhere to that philosophy that indeed the applicants are paying for their services, but not intending to gouge anybody, obviously. The lines 27 to 29 and the different fees based on size of tree, is that based on, it incrementally goes up with the bigger the tree is? Is that based on the arborist's work, the amount of work that the arborist does, or is it a penalty, or is it to be an incentive to the applicant to not cut the tree?
I think that was probably what was thought in the beginning.
Hopeful that it's an incentive to not cut the bigger trees or something.
Is that valid? Does it work?
Oh, we don't have it we don't have that currently. This isn't something new.
I don't think the price will have too much of an effect, honestly.
So the answer would be no.
It might for some people, but overall, I don't believe so.
So where I was getting with, is it simpler to just have one fee period per tree versus based on the size?
I think this is fine. This is what we came to because there is more work involved, the more trees removed. And I think we came to the conclusion that it wasn't fair for one applicant to be removing a dead dog, or say a dogwood for, right now it'd be $70, and then somebody else to come in and remove 12 trees for $70.
Yeah, okay.
So this has a little bit more of an impact on the loss.
Okay, well, that helps me because I guess we're being mindful that when it says 16 to 24 inches, not necessarily one tree, but it can be multiple trees, right?
And it's a little bit more in scale, like you think we do building permits based on the cost of the job. This is almost a similar way, right? So the bigger the job, the bigger the spend, the more work, the more impact on the city overall. To cut out a 10-inch tree, they're gonna be there for a few minutes. If they're taking out a 30-inch tree, it could be all day, which means they have vehicles parked on the street, there's noise, there's people, there's chipping, cones.
So Susan, do you want to start over again and focus on each one individually, see if we can come to conclusions?
I would appreciate that because I have a question starting with number 1.
Okay,
Well, again, I think that's been in there from the beginning, just as an update of it's currently 50. We figured, okay,
So,
given 14 years, it probably needs to go up.
and this is what's got me stumped a little bit.
Yeah.
I thought you said previously, we really don't know what the actual cost is. So what I'm trying to ask is nothing more than, do we honestly not know what the average man hours are and what the average cost is to be able to justify how we got from 50 to 100? And whether or not the 100 is valid, and maybe the 100 should be a different number. So I'm kind of curious how did we arrive at $100?
So you're seeking a breakdown similar to line 51 to 57?
Well, I thought that was a gold standard in here, where Liz actually could at least ballpark or put in the actual cost.
For each of the items here, a breakdown.
And I'm not asking for precision. I'm asking for, does it make sense to be able to defend fees, even though we're going to look in more detail during the budget of how you're getting from point A to point B?
Liz, how do you feel about the tree plan review fee?
I mean, if you remember my last email, I still have questions on when it would even be applied. I'm just quite honestly not sure. So that I can't give a good statement on it until I'm.
But it's for everything. I mean, it's for everything there's a tree plan for, and there's a list, it's tree removal permits, demolition permits, house move permits, land disturbance activity of more than 1,000 square feet, subdivision, site plan review.
So right now, we only charge that $50 review on major additions, new construction. That's the only time, and we charge it once.
So you don't charge it for the other,
for just a person removing a tree that has to replant a tree? No.
Okay.
You could read this, that say somebody wants to demolish a house, and this is what I wrote, you have a $100 review for tree protection plan. Now they want to remove one tree and build a house. So then we have a planting plan and a new tree protection plan. So now we're up to 3 $100 review fees, plus the $20 processing fee, plus the $25 administrative fee, plus the $50 to $300 removal fee. And it's not so much the total fee that I agree or disagree with. It's just so many different little items.
Well,
And if that's how we're charging it, a different charge every single time, I think 100 is probably overkill. I mean, but we do a lot when somebody I mean, I go out 3 times just for one demo permit. So, I mean, it can take hours and hours for somebody building a new house of our time.
Commissioner Sharp, are we answering your question
Well, I
satisfactorily?
think we're surfacing whether or not we should have a more deliberate method of establishing fees. Now, I realize the city of Rehoboth Beach has been a little, I don't know what the right word is, for how we've approached fees in the past. Some things have just, never mind. I won't try to describe it. But since we've gone to all this effort, it seems to me that we should, knowing we have more work to do on fees, we should have some, it's like, do we or do we not need some fundamentals of how we think about whether or not fees are needed and how we get to that justifiable dollar amount. And so it brings in the whole thing of how Liz is talking about, you get a fee here, you get a fee there, you get a fee there. It's a philosophical situation that I don't know that we need to solve today, but I don't know how to answer the question. If we're going from $50 to $100, somebody answer the question, why?
Yeah, I can appreciate this. They're always multi-step. In other words, a tree plan review is going to always also lead to a tree removal permit fee, right? I mean,
If it's a so for demo,
Right.
they have to provide a tree plan that shows all the trees on the lot and shows the fencing around them.
right?
The way I read this, that would be $100.
Yeah, okay. But then chances are they're going to be coming back to remove some or not.
More than likely,
Yeah, so-
but not 100%
Okay.
of the time.
But those are separate processes because they're protecting first before they're
If-
coming back.
So think of it this way, if somebody's gonna demolish a house, build a new house, and remove trees, I'm coming out to that site 7 times.
Right.
I'm
How
doing
many,
seven,
Liz?
7 different inspections. That's a lot. That's why I'm saying I don't necessarily disagree with the total cost, but it's just the 7 different costs.
So is that something, Commissioner Sharp, that you'd like articulated, written out, that for this item, it takes 6 steps, 7 site visits, this much time, publication in the paper, city time for Ann?
And I can just cite, it's just exactly like lines 53 through 58 and 59.
Okay,
That to me, if anybody wanted to look 10 years ago and say, how did you come up with these fees in the first place? I'm not sure we'd find anything, but 10 years from now, if somebody wants to look back and say, okay, what were the benchmarks? Where were you? And how did you get there? If we don't have that now, maybe we should put it in. But I don't want to do anything that will slow this to a crawl. I mean, because I know you did mention we need to look at all fees maybe during the budget process.
well, I think now's the appropriate time, though.
Okay.
So I would say, Susan, if you would work with Liz on just doing a little more detailed rationalization of the fees and
Well, I
process.
mean,
I mean, that's very interesting to know that the city arborist has to go out on a
Right.
site 7 times.
And I would dovetail on that. I would never have expected that it would take that many visits.
right, right.
Well,
And if there's an average that we could come up with, you know,
I will clarify and say that's without a single complaint that I need to go
yes.
look at.
Yes.
So that's just base inspections.
So Liz, you said another option, you told me in an email that another option would be to have a new home process be a separate fee. Are you saying also maybe demo would be a separate or just the new home process?
I would say the whole process.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Because to me, if it's a property owner removing and replacing one tree. I think the $100 is maybe a little bit of an overkill. But see, there's so much variance in this versus the Parks and Shade where I can kind of say, okay, pretty much every meeting we have, each case is about 30 minutes. Some might be 25, some might be 40, but overall they average 30. I mean, and what I'm coming back to is this one permit I did recently and they ended up withdrawing it. So we had a $20 application fee and that was it. I had to go to her house twice. And she emailed me 10 times and called me 4 times I had to spend. I literally spent hours and hours. So it's really hard because you do have, you have a lot of outliers. And you can't really increase the average person's cost because 5 times a year I have something like that.
Right.
So it seems to me that today is going to be hard to judge these fees, and are going to have to be postponed until we get more analysis.
I would like to talk about the appeal fees, because I think that's, first of all, we have some real specifics there, and I think we can settle those two. I mean, the rest of it are permit fees and review fees that are complicated.
Anything you think we can resolve, let's go ahead and address
I would like to try to resolve the appeal fees, because right now it's $250, but Liz is showing actual costs of $620. There's also the appeal to the city commission, which, you know, does not happen very often. I think only one case in the last few years would even be permissible under the new code. So I don't know that we need to dwell too much on that one. But for any appeal to Parks and Shade Tree, do we want to stick with a $250 fee when the actual cost is over $600? That's my only question.
How many numbers are we talking about? How many times 620?
How many appeals?
In a year.
Well, how many do you think?
The reason I'm asking is maybe maybe there are things that we can just say, well, that happens 6 times and 250 is what it's going to be or whatever it is, without having to charge that back to, because if I'm a citizen sitting out here, I'm saying, whoa, we're paying the arborist salary twice. I'm paying it and we're getting it out of the $30 million budget again when we talk about it in February.
I think you would go for that for every appeal fee, every parking ticket.
Right.
I mean,
That's right.
that's a pretty slippery slope. This is something,
Not a slippery slope.
this is something
It's-
very specific, charged because somebody's appealing. So above and beyond it, I think the idea in the appeal fees is to capture back about what it costs, if that's my understanding at least. Because we should be doing something, if I wasn't doing this, then we would be doing something else that would benefit the public. So I think that's the idea behind it.
Well, and also look at it another, I think, Mayor, part of the reason that you wanted to keep the tree code separately is because if they had to go to the Board of Adjustment, they'd be paying $1,000, but when they go to Parks and Shade Tree, they only pay $250. But there's a disconnect there, because they're paying $250, but it's costing us closer to $1,000.
That's why I asked how many times that
How many
happens.
times it happens.
I'd say, what,
Well, we had
15
two
in a year?
last-
15 in a year, that would be at the high end, 10 in a year, maybe.
She thinks there's
Well,
gonna
if
be
we took
fewer.
away the mitigation, the fee in lieu of mitigation, I would say, yeah, 10 maybe,
10 a year? Okay.
possibly. I mean, this is just guessing, because, I mean, we had 2 actual appeals last month, last month's cases.
For me, there's a fine line, though, between the normal course of business and doing business, and then above and beyond, which is what the fee should cover. So that's where I think the confusion is for me on fees, and I agree with Commissioner Sharp on all the fees, is that when does it become the normal course of business? And then if fee kicks in because it goes above and beyond, if the arborist has to spend an exorbitant amount of time on something, for instance, I'm okay with a fee. But that's where I'm a little confused in some of these.
Well, the lines 51 to 57, I think, pretty much follow the formula for establishing the fee for the Board of Adjustment and the Parks and Planning Commission. So,
But that is that above and beyond what their normal job would be?
Well, no, but do you consider an appeal process to be over and above? In other words, somebody
I
doesn't
think
have
that's
to
part of the
appeal.
job, right? Is that part of
No,
the job?
but the homeowner doesn't have to appeal. They choose to appeal. And so
Right.
then the question becomes, should they pay for the time of that? Because it's not it's not an everyday process. They're choosing to object and to appeal something.
Right, but so as I look at this, though, back to what Commissioner Legris said, I say, okay, I'm paying for all the exact real time, but my guess is some of that time really is just the normal course of business.
And
No, it isn't.
Commissioner, I agree with Commissioner Bennett. The city secretary, the arborist, the IT, we're paying those salaries anyway. It is the normal course of business. What I want the fee to cover is advertising and the legal time, which we would otherwise not be paying those things. So for me, that's 200 and 150. I'd be willing to go from 250 to 350 to cover those, the legal and the advertising cost. I think it should cover that. I don't know that I'm inclined to say it should cover staff time.
Well, although I think Liz did just say if she wasn't working on an appeal, she'd be doing something else.
Yeah, so when I'm sitting in this meeting, I've
Yeah.
gotten 15 emails.
Right. Yeah.
So think of it that way. That's 15 things that I'm not getting to. So say we have a
Because of an
resident
appeal.
with a complaint about a street tree, or we have people waiting to have their permits evaluated, plans waiting to be reviewed. There's a cost for that delay. Maybe it's not the actual cost I put on here. Maybe we assign it less than that. And I do get the point that this is time that I'm paid to be here already. But I don't think that the public would be happy that somebody appealing is taking up that time and that money, to an extent at least.
And also, there's just a big discrepancy between appealing to Board of Adjustment and appealing to Parks and Shade Tree. And, I mean, there's a big discrepancy between any kind of big plan to, site plan, subdivision, and this.
What's the fee for the planning commission?
Thanks.
Anything?
I think it's 1,000, isn't it?
I think that's right.
How much?
I think it's
1,000.
1,000.
I think they're all
1,000, so
1,000.
1,000.
The amount of time that the planning commission.
Wait a minute, Ann?
Partitioning is $1,400, it's $1,000 for the application fee and $200 per lot. And then a minor subdivision goes up from that. Major subdivision goes up from that. Site plan, I believe, is $500.
500, okay.
Thank you, Ann.
Okay,
Ed?
thanks, appreciate that.
Yeah, I can't see going up any more than 350.
Well, next year it's gonna cost more than that, because I know advertising goes up every year, I'm assuming.
Well, I tell you, speaking of advertising, that's one, this is you all may want to address this when you look at budgets in general. I have seen other codes written where the advertising cost is passed on directly to the applicant, whatever it is. In other words, rather than, you'd have a fee for the administrative time, and then they would also have to cover the cost of advertising and mailing. Because that then gets to people that like withdraw, and it has to be re-advertised, and which has become a problem in some cases. And if they're directly responsible for the actual, so these are actual additional costs of the city, then that's another way to do it, to just pass on those actual costs for the advertising and the mailing. Unless it would be administratively hard to figure, but otherwise, the idea would be that they would pay those directly.
How much time, how many of these concern new construction? Is there I have for years encouraged that we think about charging an impact fee
Yeah, most of them, majority.
for new construction. So that's another thing to consider. Why don't we consider tacking an impact fee on new construction to cover the very things that Liz is talking about?
I would
If she has to come back time and
That's
time and
also
again
commonly
because
done.
somebody was supposed to take out this many trees, and then they decided the day they were clearing the lot that they needed, she has to come back again and again.
Well, and that's kind of what happened with the current case. We had, maybe 30 minutes spent on it, and they pushed it to the following month because they couldn't, not the commission, but the applicant was confused. So that's going to cost significantly more because we'll spend probably at least an hour of time on it.
And does
But
that
I
have to
just
be
think-
re-advertised and everything too?
I'm not sure. Does the one case have to be re-advertised that's continued for Park and Shade? I looked at Ann. Ann looks back at
Generally,
Glenn.
we don't feel the need to re-advertise. When we've advertised appropriately, then we announce during the meeting that we're deferring to the next meeting,
All right,
generally,
that-
no.
okay, that's fine.
Well, I think I could probably defend costs based on advertising and legal time, but I would suggest that the legal time here, for instance, in this example, 140 could be anemic, just the amount of time directly in the meeting and then any pre-meeting conferences. I think it would be more to 250, 450, I think would be reasonable, for instance. For this one.
Yep.
Just for this one.
Right, no, that's all we're talking about. So is that a number we should use? I mean,
I think the citizens are going to say you're just punishing us, although I understand where the mayor's coming from.
But again, this is an appeal. This is up and beyond.
That's correct.
The normal services that we provide to the city.
Yeah, I've never gotten any feedback on the price of the appeal currently.
okay, right.
At 250, but at 620 we
No,
would.
nobody's come to you and complained that it's too low. Is that what you're saying?
Never had anybody say a word about it one way or the other, which would tell you that it's so low they're not batting an eyelash at it.
They don't want to stir the pot. Anybody?
Yes.
Anybody?
Carolyn Diefendorf, first city resident. I like the idea of the advertising being passed on directly. And so maybe there's a base fee plus advertising. Because if it, if that's a variable cost that is being incurred specifically for them, and it can go up or down, never down. It can just keep going up because the paper has decided to increase their costs. I think that might be a way to do it, but again, it might be administratively difficult to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. I would rather see a set fee. I think it's easier than having to monitor each one individually, waiting to get invoice from the media and newspapers because it's in multiple newspapers, correct? So you've got to wait and receive all those multiple invoices and then pass them on. I'd rather just do our best to justify a set fee. And then if we need to increase it every year, then that would be fine. So Susan, where are we?
Well, you said 450. Is everybody willing to live with that?
As a compromise?
I think it's too much.
What do we put in for what we take to the hearing? I guess that's been your theme today, Mayor.
I could certainly live with the 450, just on the defense of it. The 250 is currently, which is what is being charged. And if we feel that the numbers we're given for actual costs on advertising and mailing is 200, then to me, it's an easy justification. Move it to 450 for the time being, and then it'll at least get us to the public hearing.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I can certainly live with that. Is that?
Did they appeal to the Parks and Shade? They did originally, but they withdrew their appeal. Yeah, for some of these applicants, especially one recently that illegally cut trees down and tried to appeal originally to the Parks and Shade Tree Commission, 450 is nothing.
Right.
I mean, their penalty was
Well, in fines.
tens of thousands of dollars. Tens
Well,
of thousands of
if you
dollars.
think about it this way, that most of the applicants, it is related to new construction. They're already spending 2-3 million, probably, assuming they bought the lot and are building a home.
So I'm not trying to gouge anybody. I think this is very prudent and reasonable, that we're asking them to pay for the fees up and beyond what the normal service rate is.
I would just think it needs to be consistent. So if this is how the Board of Adjustments is done, this is how FOIAs are done, I think it should be across the board. However we create our fees, it should be the same.
You think this should be the same fee as Board of Adjustment, or just
No,
the
I think it
process?
should be the same, back to what Commissioner Sharp said, the same methodology.
Yeah,
I'm
I
not,
agree, I
you
agree,
guys
okay.
get to decide that methodology,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But it shouldn't change for Parks and Shade
Right.
Tree versus
Right.
permit costs
Yeah.
versus
Maybe
Board of
looking at lowering Board of
Adjustments.
Adjustment fee.
It's kind of like coming up with a formula.
Yeah.
And each time you use the basics of the formula, it gets applied. And then we can justify, this is why this formula exists.
Mr. Miller, question for you. Do we have any ability to develop, if you will, an hourly departmental overhead cost so that we can look at what it costs for an employee per hour? So that you have a baseline departmental overhead and then build from there, if you will. I think that would be a consistent number to work with. As our budget has increased over the years, we've increased salaries, benefits are costing us more. You know, it's having a $250 fee for 10 years when everything else is going up. You know, it just, I think, as Commissioner Sharp said, we need a formula to base it on. And previous work that I've done, things start with a departmental overhead cost and you build from there. And I don't know if we have the ability to do that. That takes a while to get, so I would be comfortable with the 450 here right now. But I know you also are working on a fee structure that we can extrapolate from the code, the zoning, or the code book, if you will, to have a standalone appendix so that it is our fiduciary responsibility each year at budget time to review each and every fee so that we know what's going on and it just doesn't get caught in the cracks.
Well, he indicated that, yes, he can track that out, but I think there's a fundamental philosophical difference here that's unresolved, and that is, do we utilize those hourly fees for employees? Because what I'm hearing is that there's an agreement to not follow this formula that includes the city secretary's time and the arborist's time and the IT time, but instead to look at advertising and legal only.
And I can clarify what I said about that, which is I could support that in the short term because we, as a city, I don't think we have yet come up with the cost of man-hours and average administrative costs. Because to me, there should be some kind of threshold. And maybe it is the differentiation between day-to-day work and appeal work, where you go from one level of cost to a higher level of cost, which is supported by the amount of staff hours that are additional when you go through additional processes, whether it's number of times that becomes extraordinary or the number of hours that becomes extraordinary. It's kind of like legal fees. Glenn?
Extraordinary in connection with that. No, what I'm thinking about actually as you talk, I think that getting those costs, figuring out those costs has value in figuring out, sort of where do you start from. There's also a public policy part of this that I think should be considered, which is at what point do you price people out of access to their government? People should have access to the government and be able to bring an appeal when they think the government has somehow wronged them. And there's at some point you price them out of that. So I think you have to really keep that in mind as you figure out what is an appropriate fee.
And that's why I termed it earlier as this is a philosophical discussion that I don't know, as long as I've been involved in the city of Rehoboth, I don't think I've ever been involved in that kind of discussion of exactly what underpins where we're coming from when you talk about access to government. I mean, we've got other fees that may be coming in the pipeline, stormwater, and who knows what else coming down the road. And it seems like taking a more serious and deliberate calculation of how we're getting from point A to point B this is the right time to do it. But I don't want to, as I said, I don't want to slow down what we want to accomplish in the short term.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner. Again, I suggest that we just put 450 in there for the reasons I articulated earlier, and we bring that forward, being mindful that there's going to be additional opportunity in the future for public input and for further evaluation by each of us on whether we support that still or we want to reduce it or go higher. Is there any objection? No objections? I'd like to go.
I object. I couldn't disagree with you more. The entire philosophy is we're talking fee for service. And you do that with wastewater, you do it with stormwater, or you're going to do it with stormwater. You do it with freshwater. That's easily calculated. But when we go through the budget every February, we calculate how much it costs us to hire and maintain employees. And that's for the year. And that's for all the things that they do. I can see where advertising is billed separately, and I can see where legal is billed separately. But everybody else works on either a salary or some form of wage, and we hire them for the entire year. Now, if they spend their time doing all kinds of different things, if we have to hire, if Evan has to hire another person to help the arborist, that's because she's using her time up and we need more help. Probably do too. But to have the applicant have to pay for that is just goes against everything that other than the things that are billed directly. Thank you.
Respectfully, I agree with you.
Good for you. Good for me.
And that's what I said earlier, right? That we're not going to, that 450 is based upon advertising and what I believe is more accurate fee to reflect what the city solicitor charges to attend it. Not with city secretary, not arborist, and not IT. So I believe that mirrors exactly what your philosophy is. I just happen to believe that 450 is a reasonable fee to put in there for further discussion so that we can kind of at least conclude number 4.
And I disagree. I would say I can add 200 and 140. I have no idea where those numbers came from, but I suspect they're pretty accurate. That comes to 340 in my calculation.
Well,
Proposed is 250.
what I want to do is conclude. We've got, I think, one that is indicated 450 to at least put it in there now, not that they're going to agree with it in. And we got one against. Ed, what's your?
The philosophy that I have is that we should only be billing for legal and advertising costs. I think we all pay property tax. I think we have an inherent thought that we have access to our government for doing day-to-day jobs with that, and I don't think we should be billing for any of those individual times. So whether it's 350 or 450, as long as that's the philosophy, that's what I'm fine with.
Well, then, so I'm hearing 450 is okay, and we can, again, get better estimates. I agree with that, and does anybody else agree with at least putting it in?
I'm fine to move it forward.
Okay, so we've resolved number 4 for now. It's not a gimme.
Well, I'm almost afraid to ask, do we leave 5 alone on the appeal since it's highly unlikely? I mean, these things are very few and far between. The appeal of Park Shade Tree to the city commission, that's currently and proposed at 250. Do we do anything with that?
I think they should mimic and be the same.
The same, okay.
The same as the appeal to the Parks and Shade Tree Commission? Okay. So we've got,
I'm sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, I was just going to say we got 4 and 5 maybe concluded, maybe not. Go ahead, Commissioner Sharp.
Did I miss something on number 5 here on this? I'm sorry, number 6.
No, we were on
Maybe I'm
number, we
jumping
were
the
on number
gun.
5.
Okay.
Number 5. Do you want to share anything? Or Ed, Commissioner Czerniawski indicated he thought number 5 should mirror number 4.
I would be in agreement with that.
Okay. Any objection?
You heard mine, it's still the same.
Yep, then we
I
got
think
your.
we're gouging the citizens.
Yep, we
We're
got.
not, but I think that's going to be perceived as.
Susan, what,
I put down 450 as a sort of a.
yeah. And so do you want to address any, or any
I thought the other
additional?
fees that that I needed to work with Liz to see what we do with the plan fee. I mean, it sounded to me like the removal permit people were okay with, and that the fee in lieu we were okay with, but it was the whole plan fee of that.
Well, if we're going, I mean, I don't know how that discussion about the 250, 6 foot, how that affects it in terms of paying for staff time, because I think that's what that plan review fee is about staff time.
Yeah. So then would we have different ones for different types of project, like new, I think you were suggesting something different for new houses.
I guess we need more guidance if we're not charging for staff time for these. What are they, are we supposed to have fees if we're, you know, I'm not sure now.
I think, and I think it was Commissioner Legree brought it up, I think that in terms of new construction, we should holistically look at that and have an impact fee.
Bingo.
And that would include whatever extra work is required for tree plan reviews, et cetera.
And Liz, what are your thoughts about the percentage of separation? What percentage of this type of work is are new homes?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Okay.
What percentage of
Yeah,
what?
are remember I said a while ago, how many of these are new construction problems that keep
He's
you coming
referring to
back?
appeals.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm still back on appeals.
Okay, appeals is, I'd definitely say more than half. Like
Half.
last month, both of them are related to construction.
So Commissioner Chernowski's suggestion that we talk about impact fees could reduce your load a little bit. I mean, could reduce the costs of the appeal a little bit, because that would be in the impact fee. In other words, we would be charging that in the beginning and not separating it out when their appeal is taking place. Am I making sense? Probably not.
Very few, if the majority, I think what you're saying is, you're thinking like the majority of new construction go to appeal.
Yes.
People,
Is
it's,
that not true?
no.
Okay.
The majority of the cases are related to new construction. Not, it's, if we have 30 new houses built, we may have 6 cases for park and shade out of those.
Okay.
So the majority of tree permits just don't go to appeal, honestly. And especially if we're getting rid of the fee in lieu of mitigation appeals, we're really reducing that number.
Well, maybe I'm comparing apples and oranges. So you're not coming out that many times. Did you say 10?
I'm sorry, I really don't understand what you're asking.
I think he's saying for a new construction, you go out 7 times. Is that what you, on average?
So we go out 3 times for the demolition. That's pre-24 and post. Then I go out once for the tree permit. That's 4. Then we usually have 2 finals. That's 6. And then I have to do a closeout inspection 2 years later. That's 7. And then if I get any complaints or the contractors need to meet me on site because they don't understand something or they have questions on planting plans, I'd say I probably average 8. And let's be clear, some of these are only like 10 minutes. Some are 40. It just depends.
So where we haven't gotten yet, or the way it sounds to me, is there's real value in talking about an impact fee.
Yeah.
But we're gonna have to figure out what's in that impact fee.
Right.
That might, over time, either alter up or down any individual fees that would be charged or may not be
I guess
charged.
here's another question. This is a question for Glenn. Do we have to put the fees in the code? Or can we state that the fees are as set by the city and then have that process be?
I think most municipalities do it that way. It's very odd that we codify all of these codes or
I've seen
fees.
it done both ways, but I think that there should be, a check-in every now and again with the commissioners as to fees, so you bless them, but I don't think they absolutely have to be codified.
I'm not sure. I agree that maybe it should be codified, because we've got the Parks and Shade Tree Commission. Anyhow, I'm sorry. I would prefer that it be codified so that it's going in front of the people, our constituents.
I'm not sure that some of those others that Ann told us about earlier with the subdivision, I'm not sure all that's codified. Is it? It is? It's specifically in there? Okay, all right. I thought it was. Right, well, that would be one way of being able, for you all to be able to revisit on a more global basis for impact fees and not have to change the tree.
Yes, and it's highly noted how you said "you all."
Well, just to, if we're trying to circle this back to conclusion, when it comes to tree removal permits, if it's one for one tree coming out, one tree going in, I don't think that they should be charged that extra tree plan review fee. If it's more complicated and there's a lot of demo, a lot of trees going in, new construction around the house, then I think that tree plan review is valid. But what I don't, and the reason why I mention an impact fee for new construction is I don't want to nickel and dime the average resident just trying to do little things. And that's what I want to avoid here.
Does it
Does that up?
Does it sound like number 4 or more? Liz, I'm looking at number 4.
Okay.
Those are mostly individual citizens and not commercial people.
I don't know how they charge it, but I would imagine if it's related to new construction, that the property owner would be the one paying the fees.
Now I'm confused. Which is par for the course. So number 4 might not be all citizens paying that $250 or $450 as the mayor is going forward with. It might be half commercial folks who are
You mean like
building.
the contractors themselves? Possible. I mean,
But more than likely, these are residents. for
yeah, I
number
don't think we
4.
get too many contractor appeals. They may be there, almost everybody has contractors they're paying to represent them at these appeals, but I don't think the contractors are the one,
They're not absorbing the cost, the homeowners are.
yeah.
Okay.
And they're
So the citizen is,
filing the appeal on behalf of the property owner.
gotcha. So this proposed $250 or $450 an hour we're talking is going to be paid by the individual citizen.
Yes.
Yes.
Can we hear from members of the public?
Stephanie, go ahead.
Stephanie Smith, resident. I'm really glad you're having this discussion as a homeowner. I don't understand exactly what an impact fee would be. I know that when we built our house, I don't think I'm wrong. I think we paid the city almost $15,000 as part of that process. And then we paid for all the other fees that you all are talking about along the way. So if fees were reviewed each year when you review your budget process, then you, I think, would be able to be thinking about how much of that is part of a regular person's job and how much of that is something that is over and above what you are factoring into your budget of personnel. You know, I know when I was a clinical social worker, it didn't matter whether I had 100 cases or 50 cases or one family falling apart 24 hours a day and another hardly needing me. They were still my cases no matter what. So, thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
May I say something, Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I think the impact fee on new homes, I'm talking water and sewer, is what, $1,800 about? Something like that. And that counts for the digging up of the street, putting back the asphalt, laying the pipe, and doing all the things that the city has to do to get things back to where they were. And the county, I think, charges $6,300 for their water sewer impact fees. And those fees cover what work needs to be done to support the new house. Yeah.
That's a percentage, yeah.
You know, as we're talking about a new impact fee, maybe we should figure out how much of the current fee is addressing impacts too. I know we need to pay.
You're talking about the percentage on the value of the constructions, right?
It needs to be looked at holistically.
That's right. And we're going to talk about our stormwater impact somewhere down the line.
So, Mayor, do you want me to still work with Liz on trying to get the plan fees a little further along, but the rest of them are as we've discussed?
Yes, with
Okay.
breakdowns as Commissioner Sharp suggested earlier.
Okay.
And the only other thing I had was this, number 6, the permit processing fee of $20. Is that a fee that has been in place at $20 for decades, possibly?
Probably not a decade, but
If
5 to 10 years.
if memory serves me correctly, that is sort of to have people have skin in the game, instead of somebody just coming in and putting an application in and not following up on it or just
Right.
causing the process to fall apart. It's like $20, I may follow up on this from an applicant standpoint.
I get that.
But
I'm just wondering, I'm just
$20
wondering if, while we're looking at all this, is $20 realistic in the year 2022? Maybe the answer's yes, maybe the answer's no. I don't know. So it's a curiosity on my part.
If we're doing what Commissioner Gossett suggested, we ought to say that. I mean, it's valid. It's very valid. I mean, if it's only $20, you'll just put those things in day and night. But if it's more, you may have hesitancies. But if we're not paying for staff time, then let's say it.
That's not part of the tree code. So,
All right, you've got marching orders,
I think so.
the best you can figure out?
As good as usual, yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Susan. The next item is item C, discuss code and non-code issues that may be related to but not part of tree ordinance. There is a support document embedded in the agenda, and note it's embedded up in A. And actually Susan added an extra page to it, so this will be updated sometime after the meeting and embedded in the agenda. So
I
Susan?
have it up on this screen, I just need to get it on that screen.
And you control the screen, I think.
Here we go, okay. This is something I've been thinking about the whole time we've been doing the revision, partly because the revision has taken a long time, and I realize that not every objective, and you'll see this as I go through it, not every objective that we have, that we've established for the tree code can necessarily these days be met by the tree code. And at the same time, we've done a lot of work on it, and it performs a very good role in our overall code. So what I want to do is sort of give an overview of what it is, and then go from there. In fact, I sort of divided this in 4 topics. So just a general overview of how trees benefit the city, the goals and objectives of the revised tree code, because we haven't talked about those specifically since March. A review of what the new code really means, what are the major changes, and then what else, in addition to the tree code, should we think about doing? So, you know, I think we all know that trees have a great many benefits, and I've listed a number of them here, and I'm not going to read them all. What I am going to say is there are a couple of very interesting data points that go with these descriptions that I find fascinating. In the area of stormwater, each mature tree can store 50 to 100 gallons of water during one large storm and thousands of gallons per year. I think that's very relevant here. In terms of trees saving energy, the shading and evaporating cooling from trees cut air conditioning costs by 20 to 50%. Another important figure for where we are. And my favorite is that our city's trees sequester tons of carbon each year, essentially removing the exhaust from thousands of cars. And since we have more and more cars every year, I think that may be one of the most important of all. But these are all characteristics of trees that enhance our environment, our health, and our economy. And specifically for Rehoboth also, even more, because as the CDP states, Rehoboth Beach is virtually unique among all beach resorts on the East Coast because of its abundance of trees. So a huge asset here. The first tree ordinance was adopted in 2006, and in the revision that's been in process for close to a decade, has tried to, the goal of that, it was to make it user-friendly, easily understood, and effective. This is the goal from the beginning, whenever that was. And the objectives, these are exactly as I had stated them back in February. We first presented them at the February and March meetings. And you may wonder why 2 of them are in red type. Well, they're because as good as the tree ordinance is, I think the part of the reason it's taken so long to accomplish it is that, frankly, some of the objectives cannot be met solely by the tree code. Those are the ones in red. For instance, I don't believe we're going to be increasing the city's tree canopy on private land. I just don't think so. I think I think the reality is that that we're going to see fewer. And of course, the flip side of that is we're trying the quality over quantity, native trees. I'll get to that in a minute with the features of the new code. But increase is not in the mix. And as much as I would love to do incentives, we do not currently have incentives in there. So this is also an objective not met, but up for future discussions. As Liz had put together this data for me actually a couple of years ago with our tree committee, and it's been difficult to get more up-to-date data because of the change in the city system. I wanted to include it today because even though the data is not new, the trend is evident, and the trend has been evident for some years, so you can see over time the losses that we've incurred. You know, that only, and this goes to, you know, to the larger houses being built, that only 44% of trees are being replaced on private property, but the city's doing a very good job of replacing and enhancing its canopy, which is also a very good thing that the city sort of makes up the difference for what's happening on private property. The features of the new code, which in looking at this, I think, I do think this meets our goal of having it user-friendly and easier to understand. We are keeping the minimum density at 3 trees. 1 must be a native canopy, and that's where the quality issue comes in, that we are at least requiring that. We're reducing the size of the trees planted in order to give homeowners more flexibility in selecting trees and in some cases maybe even planting them themselves. I'm not sure, I think, did we leave it as line trees count? I'm not sure whether that's going to be there in the end or not, but that is, right now, that's one of the changes in the new code. But the code also provides greater measures for tree protection during construction, and even greater protection if heritage trees, which I believe are going to be defined as 24 inches and above, are present on a residential lot. So again, that's where that protecting our canopy as opposed to increasing our canopy comes into play. And by simplifying mitigation, so no longer based on DBH of the trees removed, but a tree for tree, that's one of those areas that will decrease the overall number, but again, will make it perhaps easier to comply and therefore result in at least the right type of trees being planted. And setting a fee in lieu of mitigation to cover the real costs of planting and maintaining a tree on city property. For 2 years. But given the previous slides I've shown about the objectives not being met and the true costs, it seems obvious that the tree code by itself cannot be our only environmental protection code. So I just saw this quote a few days ago, and I thought it was very appropriate here, because the things that Talamay is saying about gardens are benefits we now get from trees, supporting life, sequestering carbon, feeding pollinators, and managing water. So with fewer trees, we need an alternative to meet our environmental goals. And if the name Doug Talamay sounds familiar, it's because he was our featured speaker here about 4 years ago. The tree committee did a workshop, and he is a very dynamic environmentalist. He's a professor at the University of Delaware and a New York Times best-selling author, and a very compelling presentation on how important it is that our trees and our plantings meet these characteristics that are on this slide. So what else can we do? So I'm going to give you these last slides are suggestions for how you might move beyond the tree ordinance. One thing is to consider a landscape ordinance. Many communities have them. It would share some of the same objectives as the tree ordinance, such as stormwater runoffs. The Resilient Communities Project had that as one of its recommendations. The idea being conservation landscaping, sustainable landscaping was specifically in the Resilient Communities Report as a recommendation. What might be in it? Well, in some of the codes I've read, they require a minimum number of shrubs per property. They require vegetative ground cover, and this is really important, and/or native plantings. So whereas we require 50% natural area, and that natural area can be trees, it can be plants, it can be natural mulch, we could consider looking at a certain percentage requiring vegetative cover instead of natural mulch, or requiring that some of the plantings be native. I've seen landscape ordinances that include a point system so that property owners have a wide range of choices. And any landscape requirements that might be adopted would be in addition to minimum tree density. And the other place where you see this is with buffers, because like line trees, buffers are where you really get a lot of bang for the buck is on borders. So a buffer for where commercial meets residential, and even a potential buffer for residential. The next one is actually something we're already doing, but we need to, I have it here because we obviously need to keep doing it, and that is to include a green infrastructure component in all city projects. This came about back in February of 2018 when then Chair of the Tree Committee, Commissioner Tony Sharp, presented a very compelling presentation about the need for green infrastructure. And what came out of that meeting was a consensus that we would indeed do that. And we have. There have only been a few. It's been implemented in the large-scale city projects. So the Lake Avenue streetscape had a huge green infrastructure component. The Delaware Avenue restrooms, that one, interestingly, because of where it's located, by itself does not have a green infrastructure component because it's too close to the ocean, we couldn't do it. But what we're doing is putting trees all down the first block or two of Delaware Avenue and considering it part of that Delaware Avenue restroom project. So I'm very glad of the way that has come together. But we really need to make sure going forward, because some of these have been afterthoughts, that all city projects include green infrastructure from the beginning. And I know that the next one's going to be controversial, but I have to say it anyway because I've thought it for years. So here's my last chance to say it, which is that I think all city projects, maybe even including the annual street paving, need to be looking at this. Partly because if you're already on the street, already doing the paving, there may be an opportunity for a street tree in that location, for some sort of other bioretention planter. Of course, the issue is cost, because we have a set budget every year for annual street paving. If you take some of that away to do the green part, then you're paving fewer streets. I get it, which is why the last bullet is there about grant funding. We obviously got grant funding for the triangle down on State Road. Maybe there's an ongoing, something that can be ongoing for grant funding for that. But it's critical, as Jay will agree with me, it's critical for stormwater management that there be this component of every project, and I just don't think we should overlook anything. The next two are really educational initiatives, and I want to emphasize that because I'm not proposing these as mandates, but as things to promote and educate. The tree committee maybe wants to sponsor, we hope we'll have it this fall, but wants to sponsor a workshop on lawn alternatives, which are these days all the rage. And I've learned, I didn't know a lot about them until the last 6 months or so, and I'm learning a lot about them. But it's basically getting rid of your turf grass and coming up with better alternatives that contribute to air and water quality, make better use of unsuitable conditions, reducing the use of chemicals, reducing the need for gas-powered mowers. But all this is an education. I don't know that any of us gravitate toward a lawn alternative without seeing the possibilities. So I'm hoping that going forward, that both with the tree committee and the city as a whole, that we can provide education to help our homeowners. And by the same token, going back to the Doug Talame quote and the things we have to ask of our gardens, pollinator gardens will supply many of the benefits that we need environmentally. Native plants and wildlife definitely create a more sustainable environment. It will protect our air and water quality. And again, it's a huge educational effort for our homeowners. And now back to incentives. Because we've talked about them in a roundabout way, and I've been thinking about them for months. And I divided the slide into 4 parts because these are not all equal for different reasons that you'll see here. A couple of commonly used incentives, and Liz mentioned these to me, and I've seen these in some codes, are parking requirement reductions, either in the size or the number of required spaces, or setback or height adjustments. I'll give you an example there from a small town from Blacksburg, Virginia, in the historic district. They have a 32-foot height limit, but if you set back the house an additional foot for green space or a tree, you can go up another foot to a maximum of 35. So it has that 3-foot leeway. We're already at 35. We already have we already have lax parking requirements, the lowest for parking requirements of probably any community around. It's hard to incentivize when you're already giving away as much as you want to give away. So that's why I think it may not work, at least with the current code. When you revise the code and think about maybe taking the height down to allow, maybe, I don't know if that would ever be acceptable or not. But right now, it doesn't, unless we're willing to go beyond what we already have, I don't see it working with the code. However, as we've also talked about, time is money in Rehoboth, so if we can provide some sort of expedited review or a no permit fee for a highly desirable tree, such as an oak, that kind of incentive, people might like that, you know, if it speeds their process of getting into the new house, that potentially could be looked at. Then in terms of, in all of the codes I looked at on trees, nearly all of them, included a specific provision that any commercial parking lot also had to have trees. And we don't have very many commercial parking lots because we don't have very many parking requirements. But I think any time there is a commercial parking requirement, like parking for a hotel, for instance, it should automatically include a requirement for trees. I mean, that is built into probably 99% of every code I've read. And then lastly, and a way of the segue to the future here is, I know the Stormwater Task Force is working on recommendations for incentives. I'll be fascinated to see what they are. All of this works together. The tree code works together because of its importance in stormwater management. What we're doing with the task force and the fees and incentives, it all works together. The tree code is only one component. I think it's good. I think we've gotten to a good place, but I think hopefully in the future we need to go beyond. And then this is the slide I added that's not in the packet today, and I did this because I wanted to sort of come full circle. We've just adopted a new CDP, and I pulled some of the very specific action items out of that relate both to the tree code as well as to the things I have just presented. How to fund new and replacement street trees, because we can have more of them if we're losing it on private property. How to educate citizens about climate change. The third bullet on the possibility of a buffer requirement for wetlands, that actually came from DNREC. I don't know how feasible it is here based on the distance they were looking at, but that has been specifically recommended that we look at these buffer requirements. maintaining our parks and open space and promote sustainable environmental practices, and then consider implementing multiple recommendations. I mentioned one of them, but all of the recommendations of the Resilient Community Partnership Project. These are all in the CDP. They all relate to the tree code, but they also relate to this let's think beyond the tree code to other environmental goals.
Thank you, Susan. Any questions of commissioners? Commissioner Sharp?
I don't have any questions, but I have a couple of comments. I'm really glad to have seen this presentation and the fact that it's embedded in the agenda, because to me, it's the absolute blueprint of how the Stormwater Task Force launches into their incentive discussion. And I know that did not get by Commissioner Legree here, but I did have a quick question on the idea of promoting lawn alternatives. Just very simplistically, if one wanted to take up their driveway and replace it with lawn or a lawn alternative that is good for the environment and good for our city, do we require a permit to take up the asphalt that's causing, asphalt or concrete that's causing a hard surface in the first place?
I don't, I'm not sure I know the answer to that.
And you don't need to answer it.
Yeah,
Because,
yeah.
do you think we do?
I'm pretty sure there's a demo permit required.
And
Okay,
there's
so
my
then
point.
there's a part where you can have an
There's my
incentive.
point.
Yeah.
That if we are requiring a permit to do the right thing, it is odd to me that that makes good sense. Now, maybe there's a very valid reason, but as our thinking progresses and we become more in tune with a coastal community that needs to up its game, so to speak, maybe we should think about what are all the barriers that might help a property owner if we cleared those hurdles or made the hurdles more simple or lower or non-existent. It might help in not only, because to me, just education is not going to do it.
Right.
The more we can couple education with some other maybe unique ideas.
Well, I think that falls into the incentive category.
I do
right
too,
there.
and that's why I'm bringing it up today,
Right.
because I know the Stormwater group is meeting on September 6th.
Right.
And I've been asking Commissioner Legree, much to I'm sure his annoyance, each time he gives us an update, I'm so anxious to see what are the incentive ideas that the Stormwater group has, and maybe the environmental group has some, maybe the Planning Commission has some. I mean, to me, it's such a convergence of all of the good work that could actually translate into some changes for property owners that would honestly get their attention. So that's all I wanted to say. I think this is so timely and really sets out an interesting blueprint. Thank you.
Yeah, I think back to your mention of permit, I think, yes, a permit's required because if you've got natural area, you've got lot coverage, you've got all these building restrictions. But maybe what you're getting at more so is the fee, being able to waive a fee. Why would we charge a fee for something like that if we're trying to promote natural over impermeable surfaces? So that's all good, very good points. Susan, thank you very much. Commissioner Bennett.
I just had one clarification on the second to last slide, Susan, where it said parking requirement reductions for the incentives and code changes.
Yeah.
What did that mean? Was that
Well,
for the
that's
city?
actually
or-
something that is done sometimes in other places where you would say, oh, you have a tree there, correct me if I'm wrong, Liz, but then maybe you would only need one parking space instead of two, or maybe your parking spaces don't have to be 9 by 18. They could be a little less than that to make room for the tree.
So that's up for private property?
It's for private property.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Is there any members of the public that want to speak to Susan's presentation? Nope, all righty. Before we get to citizen comment,
Wait,
oh, you
Mayor.
have something, Stephanie? Oh, you need to step up to the microphone.
Stephanie Smith, Norfolk Street. I think it's a great idea, and I can tell you, we were not allowed to put in a driveway
Yeah.
that was permeable.
Right, that's another issue
And
that I didn't
because
talk
it wouldn't be sturdy enough for emergency vehicles to come in on.
about. Oh, interesting.
So it's a big, it's a big kind of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
topic,
Yeah.
and it's, gives us lots of new options if you go that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I
Thank
didn't
you
know that.
very much.
May I say something, Mayor? Whoops, not again.
Yeah.
The technology is really changing on permeable hard surfaces. And it is possible to have permeable pavers, permeable concrete, and permeable asphalt if the base is done properly and the drainage is handled properly. That technology is really, really changing. And permeable pavers is kind of leading the way, and a lot of people are using them for permeable hard surface. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Stephanie.
With that, I'd like to go to the next item before we get to citizen comment, and that has to do with next steps, date of future meetings. Our next special meeting on trees is Tuesday, September 13th, 9 a.m. I presume we'll be done with that, and at least that's our target date, if you'd put that on there.
That's for
Susan, would
coming
you
back
like,
with the-
would you like to articulate, what are the expectations for the 13th?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think initially that's where you had wanted to see the full black line code. However, there are still some things.
Are we going to be
like,
there, though?
I don't know that we are, because there are a few things that came as a result of this meeting that require a little extra work and that require some changes of wording. Not that those are going to be controversial necessarily, but they would have to come back as still red line changes.
So again, it's fluid. Let's pencil it in our calendars for Tuesday, September 13th at 9 a.m. And with that, I'd like to go to citizen comment before I let Kitty speak. Kitty, you can stand up. You want to sit or stand at the lectern? Why don't you sit up right here next to Liz, and she'll make sure the microphone's there. But before you speak, Kitty, I'd like to let everybody know that we've just gelled two presentations with Envirotech. They will be making a presentation, Envirotech, at our October workshop meeting to give us a report on the state of the Lake Girard. And then they will be back at the November workshop meeting to give us, reiterate the steps of how to clean up the end of Lake Girard. So it's a two-step process. So I know that's probably what you're going to talk about there. I'll give you a few minutes preview to do that, but understand Envirotech will be coming.
I've got to tell you, I'm deaf and I'm not hearing anything.
Okay, go ahead, Kitty.
You're going to have to, I'm sorry about that, but I can tell you what I want to say.
Go ahead. Make sure that,
Can you hear me?
yep. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I agree with all Susan said about the trees. And today I was here about the trees because I don't understand. Did you say anything about the ivy that grows all over and overtaking the? She didn't. Well, is there a way to make the property owners maybe? I've gone around. I called the 2 or 3 people, the man across from Bad Hair Day and the Episcopal, different people, and I called them up about the ivy on their trees, and they took it down. And I just thought, and I go out on this highway before you come over the bridge, there's about 10 sycamore trees. I call the state, and I ask them, and they come and take the ivy off. So I thought maybe the city should do something about the ivy, because in the parks, it's taken over. And another thing, I know about 10 or 20 places where the city took down trees and didn't replace them, just in my area. And on the corner of Olive and First, there used to be, between the sidewalk and the road, there were umbrella trees all around. I mean, the Rehoboth was full of trees. And I've lived here 90 years, so I know. And I wanted to tell you about Well, that was the main thing about the city. Aren't you supposed to put the trees back after you take them down on city land?
We don't have any policy, Liz, do we?
I thought when a person took a tree down on city property. Anyway, I know a lot. In fact, one right across from where you live, there was a beautiful tree. But it's been over the last maybe 10 or 20 years, but they've taken so many trees away. And when I grew up in Rehoboth, they was full of trees. And the other thing, how can you call Rehoboth a tree city when you let Delmarva Power go around and butcher the tops out of them? I mean, that's terrible. In front of my house, I have a big sycamore tree when we moved there.
Right.
And I've been there 75 years. And they come along, and they didn't do that. When we had a lot of trees, Delmarva Power didn't do that. They started that maybe 20, 30 years ago, and they cut the tops out, and they're terrible. It doesn't look very good, and I don't know why. I think the city gives Delmarva Power permission to do that. And if they do, it's a way, maybe you could deal with the president of Delmarva Power. I've talked to him a couple times, and see if they wouldn't maybe put one street underground, because if you give them permission to cut the trees, they should reciprocate some way, and maybe they would agree to put one street at under, because those telephone poles are pretty ugly. Yeah. And they have so much on them, so there are the few things that I wanted to say about.
Thank you. We heard you, and we thank you.
I don't hear, and I'll be 90, I'll be 100, so I'm doing
99, bless your heart. Thank you, Kitty.
So I do care about Rehoboth, and I hate to see the lake like it looks. I've given up on the lake. I don't think they're ever gonna fix that. Did you contact the people about the dredging Wagamon Pond?
Yeah, yes. Oh, well, we passed that on, yes.
I talked to them yesterday, and they said the city would have to request.
Right. Now, pass that on to him.
Yeah.
All righty, thank you,
All
Kitty.
right, well, thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Are there any other comments by the citizenry, by the commissioners? Commissioner Legree?
Everybody, please watch the 6th September stormwater. We're going to be talking about incentives. And
Great.
I think we'll cover many, if not most, of the incentives that Susan talked about. And yes, there is a way. It's called money. And you can give people credit for green infrastructure contributions that they make. And that includes permeable driveways, that includes all kinds of things, that planting trees, taking no fertilizer pledges, going around and adopting street ends. There's just a bunch of incentives that you can do when you're charging people for stormwater fees. And we're going to talk about that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anybody else? If not, we'll call this meeting adjourned at 11:50 a.m. Thank you very much.